Good afternoon, Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WYSN. Everybody, no matter how smart they are, does some dumb things. Generally speaking, you could say that the people that are intelligent do fewer dumb things than other people, or their dumb things aren't as dumb as really stupid people do things. In other words, they'll do something dumb, but it's not a whopper. Or they'll do dumb things, but they don't do as many dumb things as people that are really stupid. For example, conservatives may come up with some stupid policy ideas from time to time, but they don't approach what the left comes up with, all of whose policy ideas are stupid. But understand that everybody does stupid things. Which begs the following question. And it's one that I think almost everybody's got to be thinking about with regard to this whole Bob Woodward book, Donald Trump. Well, yeah, I knew that COVID was serious, but I didn't tell anybody. I tried to not let people panic, etc. The question that just begged in this is, why in the world did Donald Trump talk to Bob Woodward? Why would he have done that? Now, I know what the answer is, but it's still a great question, and obviously it was very stupid of the president to do it. And as I say, everybody does stupid things. The president's a master tactician and rarely makes a mistake like this, but this was a mistake. We hear that Lindsey Graham encouraged him to do it. Lindsey Graham's one of the senators whose input the president has valued. Now, we need to step back for a moment. Bob Woodward wrote this book. Bob Woodward writes books. He's still affiliated with the Washington Post. But basically what he does is about once a year he comes out with some book, and it's timed to some event in the news. And the books are not it's not like he's writing a book for history. The book is essentially a long news story that is to be read now. It is about something that's going on now. And he's done books about what's going on in the White House, this, that, and the other thing. And he's got this book about the president and the management of COVID and so on. And in the book, he quotes the president as saying that he knew that COVID was serious, but he didn't want to panic the American people, so he downplayed the thing. And this has created this latest story now that everybody is going bonkers over. Now, there's two parts of the story. The second is what Trump said and how Trump is defending what he has to say. And I think that most people who are fair-minded don't have a problem with what Trump was having to say. And Trump was saying, look, I didn't see that any point in panicking people I didn't want to have happen. Essentially what's happened, shutting down the economy, had everybody overreacting and so forth and so on. I think that the president probably recognized that this was something that was going to get a fair number of people sick, but he didn't think it was worth destroying America and turning people into just an absolute freak out. Now, as it turns out, everybody freaked out anyway, so the president may as well have just jumped on board from the very beginning, but that's where he was coming from. Had the president handled this exactly the opposite, the same people that are criticizing for that Donald Trump panicked everybody over something that turned out to be an overreaction and destroyed the economy. Now, the fact that Trump can't win without regard to what he does isn't the point. The point is, why did Trump talk to Bob Woodward, allowing Bob Woodward to, and he did zillions of interviews with Trump, apparently, for this book. And Woodward found the one explosive quote out of all the things that Trump said. He found the one thing which becomes the thing that they turn into the news story and becomes the focus of the book. And oh my goodness, Trump admits that he concealed the severity of COVID from the American public and so forth, so forth, so forth. So why did he talk to Bob Woodward? Now, again, I know why he talked to Bob Woodward, but people are wondering why he talked to Bob Woodward. Now, the first part of the answer is, why did he talk to Bob Woodward? Well, it was stupid. It was a stupid thing to do. But still, he had to have a thought process involved in doing the stupid thing. And I can relate to it because I understand what happened here. First of all, he's got some people telling him he ought to talk to Bob Woodward. Now, here's what they'll tell him. look, Woodward's going to do this book. Woodward always has the ability to get sources, and your administration has been leaking like a sieve as long as you've been the president. It's better now, but there are going to be people that put out stuff, including people that put out bad versions. You're better off talking to Woodward and getting your side right there into the book. Furthermore, it's generally well known that if you talk to Woodward, you're going to come off better in the book than if you don't talk to Woodward. If you read any of Woodward's books, and he's written 95 trillion of them, they're all pretty much the same thing. He'll write these books that rarely quote anybody, but will describe what people said in a meeting, but you don't know who it is that's the source for it. In other words, a typical Woodward book will have a conversation in which three people are involved in a meeting, and Woodward will quote what all three people said, and you wonder, well, how in the world did Woodward know that? He wasn't there. And the answer is he is trusting that one of those three people in the meeting obviously blabbed to him. And he's trusting that the person who blabbed to him is telling the truth. But that's how Woodward writes the book. So they're telling Trump, look, this book's going to be written. They're going to put all of this stuff out there. So you talk to Woodward. You're going to be able to get a more favorable treatment from Woodward if you talk to Woodward, and at least you'll get your version of events out there so that it isn't something come from this one, that one, and so on. Plus, they were telling him, look, Fauci's going to talk to Woodward. All of those people that don't like you are going to talk to Woodward, and they're just going to trash you. So you may as well get your version out there and cooperate with Woodward, and that's what you ought to do. So that's what they told him. And it's not entirely unreasonable. But it's still stupid. Because Bob Woodward's an establishment figure, and Bob Woodward's purpose in writing this book is to come up with, first of all, Woodward's got to come up with some salacious thing that Trump completely screwed up, or what's the point of buying his book, right? If Woodward writes a book, well, here's what happened during COVID. Trump did this, Trump did that, and now here we are. Who cares about that book? We are COVIDed to death. He's got to come up with something that creates the bombshell. It's the sole purpose for all of these interviews. It's the same thing about why they talk about don't ever lie to the FBI, don't try to avoid talking to the FBI and so on, because the FBI, which often can't prove the actual crime they're investigating, is just looking for you to say something that incriminates yourself during the interview, and they'll use that as the thing to bring it on you on. So anyway, why did he do it? Now, I understand why should I keep saying, without ever explaining why he did it? Should I just keep saying that I understand why he did it? I should explain it. I'm enjoying saying I understand. Plus, I am a master of radio. Have you learned that I'm a master of radio? Yes. This is a way of teasing a topic or teasing a thought without actually teasing it by saying, hey, in a minute, I'm going to tell you, by continuing to dangle it out there, unless you're just bored with the subject, who isn't going to listen to hear my explanation of why Trump did it? You should learn these things from me on this. Well, I don't know. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. I don't know. How would I know what you've learned? I don't care if anybody learned. The audience should learn these things from me. They just want to hear. Well, I know they just want to hear it, but if I just did it now, then they turn off the radio after hearing it. It's the whole point. It's the whole point of constructing a program like this. You wonder why there's this thing in radio that we have called TSL. Do you know what TSL is? Time spent listening. Yeah, and the way that you stretch that out is to do kind of what I do here. It's one of the many, many reasons why I just made this decision that caller-driven talk radio, which everybody was doing, and kind of in this era of Facebook and Twitter and everybody posting their thoughts, that there was a need to go in a different direction with my program. Anyway, I understand why Trump did it, because I did the same thing. I still think it's the dumbest thing I've done in my 31 years of doing this show here. Of course you know what it is, because it's the same thing. I've told the story a million times on the air. I agreed to be interviewed by Meg Kissinger. It's the same thing. It was the same thing. Now, I'm going to explain my thought process, which was wrong. Just as I explained what the thought process of the people that pushed Trump to do it was, which was wrong. But there's always a rationale behind. I mean, unless you're just a moron, even when you do something stupid, you had some good reasons in doing the stupid thing. I'll use as an example, I love football analogies. Have you picked up on that? I love football analogies. What's the stupidest play call in the history of the NFL? Oh, come on. This is the easiest question I've ever asked. Stupid play call. The most specific play call, an actual play. You got it. It's good. Pete Carroll on the 1 yard line of the Super Bowl when Marshawn Lynch was running right through the gut of the Patriots, to throw the ball over the middle on 1st and goal on the one right into the middle of the pack rather than run it into the end zone and win the game. There was, in that stupid decision by Pete Carroll, some logic. And the logic was, A, they're not expecting the pass. Now, again, it's outweighed by all the reasons not to do it. But A, they certainly would not be expecting to pass it. B, New England was not stopping the run, so they were, what do they call that? Not clog the middle. What's that term when you put all your guys on the defense right in the middle of the line? It's not. Eight in the box. There's something else in a box. Anyway, they stuffed the box. They were set up to do that. So he figured with everybody on the line, all I'd have to do is it's just going to be stealing candy from my baby to do a little kind of jump pass and throw it over there. That's what his thought process was. Now, the downside of they aren't stopping your run. The pass play is risky. Something could go wrong, and it's 1st down. You don't want to stop the clock on an incomplete pass if you have to throw the ball away or something. There's a million reasons not to do it. And the biggest one, of course, is, hey, somebody might actually reach up and intercept the damn thing. But he had some logic behind it. And when I agreed to be interviewed by Meg Kissinger, I had some logic behind it. Now, here was my logic. And I'm telling this because this is exactly what happened to Donald Trump. Meg at the time was the gossip column. Well, I don't think she was anymore, but for several years, she was the gossip columnist for the Journal. And for whatever reason, she was always trashing me in this column. I think I know, and I don't. Meg's never explained why she hated me, but I think I know why she hated me. Early on in Meg's column, this is very early, this is back in the 90s, it's in my early time period here, I always had this kind of, and I admit, bug up my butt about how the media made such a big deal about Reitman and Miller. You recall when I came in here, I got my hands on that poetry album that Bob Reitman did back in the 60s and played that thing on the air because it drove him crazy. And I just, I came here and with sort of, what's the term, fresh eyes when I came into the Milwaukee market. And at the time that I got here, I know that this story is long and I know that it's filled with digressions, but it's kind of interesting, and it helps explain the Trump situation. I got to Milwaukee with fresh eyes, and there were, at the time, recall, I got here in 89. That was doggone near the glory era of Milwaukee radio. There were epic people on the air in this market. Larry the Legend was still here. TMJ still had Jonathan and Gus and Gordon and their whole team. Some of the morning show people that are still around now were already major stars. Bob and Brian, Dave and Carol. Carol was still with Dave, obviously, over at KTI. There were zillions of big... Bob Barry was working. I think OKY might have still had Tom Collins and Joe Dorsey on there. They did. I mean, there are huge names that were in the Milwaukee market at the time in terms of radio. I mean, you go back and look at... If you look, whoever the 30 biggest radio stars in Milwaukee history were, I bet half of them were on the air at that time when I got here in 89. In other words, the people that were on the tail end were still here, and the people that were forthcoming and emerging as being the stars of the next 30 years, Bob and Brian, Dave and Carol, me, and a few others, were overlapping with them. So I got in here with all of this talent that was on the air in Milwaukee, and it was one of the reasons why WISN radio was not doing that well. We're on the air. We didn't have any real sports, and you're up against TMJ, and there's all these music stations and so on. And they hired me because they were hoping somebody kind of shake things up and salvage the station and so forth and so on. And I came in here with all this talent that was out here, and I pick up the paper, I'm watching TV, or you read Milwaukee Magazine. Out of all these people, the only one that was ever written about was Reitman and Miller. Reitman and Miller. What is this? Remember I don't know if I was in Madison or Springfield at the time. Remember when they dropped that, not the Beanie Babies, what was the thing they did, that Cabbage Patch Kids? Reitman announced that he was going to drop some Cabbage Patch Kids over County Stadium. It was a fake thing, and some people were dumb enough to, was it Cabbage Patch Kids or Beanie Babies? It was some collective. Paul thinks it's the Cabbage Patch Kids. I mean, it's just a dumb thing. And it's not like 85 million people showed up. I mean, they got national attention for that dumb thing. Everybody does stuff like this on the radio. And then So there was all this Reitman and Miller stuff. Okay, now Meg starts her column. And I swear, every other day, she'd have in her gossip column the wacky thing that Reitman and Miller said on their show. What's this now, I'm thinking? Oh, yeah, here's Reitman and Miller today. This is what they... You know, she goes out with the little stuff, and this is the Reitman and Miller, Reitman and Miller, Reitman and Miller. Well, I found out Meg Kissinger was working for Reitman and Miller. She's being paid by them. She'd come on their show like once a week or something, and they paid her. So at the very same time that Meg was getting paid by Reitman and Miller, she was plugging them in her column. I think that's a conflict of interest, and I pointed it out on my show. I think that's why she hated me. Other than that, I don't think I ever did anything to Meg. But I pointed that out. And after pointing that out, she started, one obnoxious story on me after another. And as I've said, the problem that people who write, tried to gossip about me have is I'm so unbelievably boring. There's a general lack of dirt out there because I don't do a damn thing. That's a good thing rather than a bad thing. It's good that I don't live a very colorful life. What's the most colorful thing about my life? There's nothing. Well, that's my point. Okay, the cruise. By the way, you've been hearing the commercial. The cruise we're doing next year is the last one I'm doing. I've not explained that in depth, but it's you hear the promos that are right on the air, so forth and so on. Okay, that. Wow. Well, okay, Paul. That's the most. Wow. That's just Mark Belling does a cruise. I mean, unless you knew, and if you didn't know who I was, you'd say, so what? He does a cruise. You see my point here. You name almost anybody else in radio, you're going to get like cocaine, 5 ex-wives, or some sex scandal, or any number of goofball things that have had child support out the wazoo, and or my horse racing. That's Paul. You should see it. My horse race. Okay, I'll go to an OTB and I read in a racing form and I walk up and I punch in a ticket. I mean, if somebody watched me, they wait for 3 minutes, they'd be comatose. Okay, I own racehorses. I know. Okay, that again. That's like up there with somebody having like a nice boat down at McKinley Marina. In other words, I got nothing. There's no interesting thing about me. Oh, I have a cool car, Paul thinks. You see, you realize what bottom of the barrel you're scraping here? Again, when I say a colorful lifestyle, almost everybody has like dirt and scandal. And I'm too it's like some people say, oh, I sit down at a bar stool at Victor's. They always bring out that's the best they have. And you know what? You see me, I'm sitting on that bar stool, like drinking a LaCroix. Whoop-de-doo. It's not like I'm in there and there's like 5 women hanging all over me and I'm drunk and passing out and I'm, walking up to like fat women and asking them to dance or stuff like that. There's nothing. Yeah, the lines of coke in the bathroom or all the things that you hear about all these other people in radio. I mean, so anyway, Meg was trying to come up. I know some of you want to hear the explanation of why Donald Trump talked to Bob Woodward. Everything in its time. Everything in its time. Was it Gallo, no wine before its time? Wasn't that the Gallo commercial? I'm probably going to be corrected on this, but I bet I'm right. I think Orson Welles read that. I think Orson Welles was the Gallo spokesperson who said no wine before his time. It might have been Paul Masson now that I think of it. I do this just so people don't bother Paul with their theories as to what wine company that. Don't Google it. I mean, I'm so tired of people Googling and looking everything up. I just bawled out a guy. We were having an argument about something that happened in sports and he wanted to Google it. It takes all the fun out of it. Yeah, but was it, or I know it was Orson Welles, but was it Paul Masson or Gallo? Was Gallo. What I first think. See, I would rather just not know and think about it. I mean, we don't have to know the answer. Everybody's so anally retentive, getting to the bottom of things. Like, you want to argue about something that happened in sports, why look it up? Then you just say, okay, now you've looked it up, and there goes the 15-minute argument that you have, and you're sitting there doing nothing. So, Meg was always trying to come up with dirt on me and always trashing me in the column, and she was ripping me all the time. Yeah, okay. Years go by. She isn't doing this column anymore. The Journal had come up with this idea of doing these profiles where a reporter would take someone to lunch and write a profile of them based on the interview that occurred at lunch. Meg contacts me. I don't even know if there was email then. She probably called me up. She said she wanted to do this on me. Now, I rarely cooperated with profiles of me. I mean, there were 2 or 3 that were done back in the 90s, but I understand they all hate me. And what's the point of, giving somebody ammunition to write a story that makes you look like a dink, etc. They're going to make you look like a dink anyway. Plus, I knew Meg hated me, so you're wondering why in the world would you possibly have been stupid enough to do this? And obviously, it was unbelievably stupid to do. Here was my thought. Now, do you want to hear my thought on this? I've explained it a couple of times in the past. I always, as you know, what do I always do? Put myself in the other guy's shoes. I put myself in Meg's shoes. And I'm thinking, everybody will expect Meg to write a story about what a jerk I am because everybody knows she hates me. So, in order for Meg to actually write something interesting, she's going to take a different angle and might actually be open-minded about the story, because then people will say, that's a pretty interesting story that Meg Kissinger wrote about Belling. I didn't know this or I didn't know that, and I'm surprised that she was kind of even-handed at it. In other words, I figured she would throw a curveball because everybody's read her 97 times writing a story trashing me. What would be interesting about that? So I thought that there was a chance, and actually a pretty good chance, that this might not be a bad story. And given the fact that there isn't any actual dirt to throw out, well, she writes the story, and it was. I mean, just imagine like one of those Vegematic commercials that K-Tel used to run in the 90s, or slice and dice and I'm like the onion that they bring the masher on, shredded and cut up. And, by the time you're done with the onion, I mean, the wrapper is off of it. I mean, what I was going into that thing was a head of cabbage, and it was over with. I was coleslaw. She just sliced me up. And it was just, this is how it started. The interview was at Miss Katie's Diner. This is how she writes her story. I drive up to Miss Katie's Diner and I see an Orkin truck out front. I guess I know okay, Belling's already here. Oh my God. So I mean, it was just the tone of the thing. In other words, there was a rat in the building. That's why there was the Orkin truck out. And just ripped me apart. And it was just, it just was, he's a this and that, and I don't know. And after the thing came out, I acknowledged that it was about the dumbest thing that I ever did, and every one of you ought to mock and ridicule me for being stupid enough to do the doggone thing. And most people just rolled their eyes because it was just an overly written, ripping the guy without having any actual context for ripping him. But my thought is that because everybody expected that it would be a rip piece, that would be a reason for her not to write a rip piece. And that's what I think happened with Trump. I think Trump felt that Woodward's curveball would be to perhaps write the book in which Trump and his administration come off as having deftly handled the COVID situation, where he tried to keep the country from making the mistakes that New York made, where New York ended up having a terrible outbreak because they didn't know enough to shut down the subways, the main point of transmission, and because Andrew Cuomo ordered all the COVID patients into the nursing homes, creating massive death of elderly there. That this was not replicated across the country because Trump tried to handle this thing as deftly as possible, that he shut down the border and especially shut down China, which is where the thing was coming from, as early as he possibly could. On the other hand, he tried very hard to throw the country into a total panic. They tried to be transparent. Every day they'd have those advisories with Bricks and Fauci and so on, and that Trump actually thought that by cooperating and by saying, okay, come in and I'll answer any question that you have, this, that, and the other thing, that he thought perhaps Woodward rather than writing the book. Everybody expects the book that Woodward would write. Trump did something wrong during this, and because that's what Woodward always does. And I think Trump thought by being open and transparent and feeling as though he had nothing to hide because he's happy with the way his administration has handled this, but just cooperating and being reasonable with him, that would be the best way to go at it, that Woodward would throw his own curveball and write the book that would be surprising, which would be an even-handed treatment of the handling of all of this. Well, Bob Woodward doesn't have the capability. Even if the book is more interesting to write a book that way, just as Meg Kissinger did not have the capability of writing a fair-minded profile of me, which means Trump was stupid to do the interview with Bob Woodward, just as I was stupid to do it with Meg Kissinger. But as in the case of Meg Kissinger, there was a rationale behind my decision. It just should have been outweighed by all the reasons not to do it. In other words, I made a bad decision. It wasn't an end-of-the-world decision like Pete Carroll costing his team a Super Bowl by throwing the ball right over the middle on first down after they had been running down the gullet. It's not like, Meg didn't have any actual... She just did a story that was critical of me. And the Woodward piece here with regard to Trump and this, there's not going to be any legs on this. It's just another one of these things where for 4 days everybody goes crazy about it, and then they'll bring up some other thing, some interview from Trump from 2011, or somebody does this, or somebody does that, or some other thing. We're not even in October. There's going to be 14 October surprises. It's just the whole cumulative thing out there. But in the end, I think most people understand that Donald Trump did not want to create a panic in the country. And if he underplayed this, and I still believe the original take of underplaying was the correct take, while COVID is... See, the thing with is it serious or not, that word is such a hard word to define. There are things that are, quote, serious that are not fundamental crises that... The war that Britain had with the Falkland Islands was serious, but it wasn't World War II, if you know what I'm saying. And the COVID situation is not something that was going to cause 25 to 30 million Americans to die, but it certainly is a health situation in which people did die and was going to have some severity to it in the same way that other outbreaks that we've had in the past had. So, as you know, I think Trump has handled this from the beginning just fine, with a couple of things that I would disagree with, but I think that he's handled this just generally fine. But in terms of why he did it and why he gave Woodward the ammunition here, Trump can't deny that he said it because Woodward taped the interviews. Everybody knows that Trump made the comment that he did, and Trump's people and Trump are going to try to explain what his thinking was throughout this, and I think that his explanation will be good, but it'll turn into the attack piece, and the people that are just looking for anything to rip on Trump will do it. So obviously he should not have spoken to Trump, but that's why he did it, and I'm sure he regrets it, and I'm sure he's saying, I'm never again going to be dumb enough to talk to Bob Woodward, that these people are out there, they're not fair, they don't have the, any thought that I had that he'd be fair toward me, because that might make him look good, is just, they don't care about looking good, they just care about beating him. They're just, the establishment is obsessed with getting rid of Donald Trump, which leads me to my next topic. Why didn't you stop me from that Meg Kissinger interview? I probably didn't tell you. I generally don't tell anybody. Well, yeah, I mean, and they took the picture outside, and by the way, the picture wasn't bad. I mean, the only thing bad about it was she just wrote, and everybody's reaction was, it was like she'd write this story with this venom, but there was nothing to back up the venom. In other words, okay, he's a monster, but then you're looking for the paragraph that explains the monstrous thing about me, and there's just nothing there other than... You're right. They still have that. Well, that's just, they don't have any actual photos. You think I'm gonna go over to the jury? Hey, you guys want to take my picture? They still run that photo. That photo's 30 years old. They still run that. Well, what do you mean pathetic? I'm glad if they want to let people think I still look like that, I'm perfectly fine with it. Why would I be against that? The question being begged here, there is, and it's even greater than I thought. I always acknowledge when I read something wrong. I certainly have known that the establishment despises Donald Trump and is threatened by him and desperately wants him out. But even I am surprised at the depths they are willing to go to. I shared with the audience, by the way, people keep sending me this story that I actually put out there myself. It's been on Belling.com. Check the website, you people. Guy who's with a couple of think tanks, including the Claremont Institution, has written a piece in which he's predicting that there's literally going to be a coup after the election, that if Trump wins the vote, that the Democrats are going to try to bring the thing into the courts, get a favorable court ruling that Biden actually won as all late ballots come in, and that they are already putting in place the mechanisms to use the military to force Trump to leave office. It seems extreme, except after all of the things that we've seen in 2020, nothing seems too extreme. Nothing seems unthinkable at the moment. If the election is one that's going to be decided by John Roberts, which many people believe that it will be, that it's going to go to the Supreme Court, John Roberts is the decisive vote. I have zero confidence that John Roberts would, even if the law and the facts back him up, side with Donald Trump, because I believe that Roberts has demonstrated that he's a figure of the establishment, and it's clear that the establishment is willing to do anything to get rid of Donald Trump. Well, that's gotten me to thinking, something that I do from time to time, think. Why are they so threatened by him? Because after all, on its face, if you step back and take a broad look at the Trump presidency, he's generally, in terms of his government, within the mainstream of American political thought. There are a number of issues in which many Republicans are more conservative, at least by traditional standards, than Donald Trump. The positions that he's taken until he became president were positions that many Democrats shared. As an example, Trump's position on trade and China has been very similar to Bernie Sanders' position on trade and China. Bernie won't admit that. But Bernie Sanders and the people on the left wing of the Democratic Party have been objecting to America doing trade deals that allows businesses to outsource their production to third world countries and to China and then come in and dump those products in the United States, costing American workers their jobs. That's been more so than a Republican issue, a leftist issue. Trump takes it. Most Republicans didn't have that stance, and some still disagree with Trump and his China bashing and his tearing up of some of the trade deals that we have. Trump has been very critical of America's entanglement in some of these foreign wars, especially in the Middle East. And he's been very critical of the amount of money that we spend on defense spending for NATO. Those are leftist issues. Until Trump became president, who was always objecting to us sending the military to the Middle East? Some, not all, but some liberals. Not the Clinton wing of the party. They've been all for that stuff. And Barack Obama is the guy that escalated the war in Afghanistan. But by and large, the people that were, for all my life, the people that are marching against wars tend to be lefties, right? And saying we shouldn't be involved in this, we shouldn't be involved in that, no blood for oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that's Trump positioned. So it's within the mainstream, but if anything, it is a position that I think could be described as one that more liberals would have held than conservatives. I think, again, Trump has been demonstrated to have been correct on that issue. I supported the Bush doctrine in the Middle East, and I still believe getting rid of Saddam was the right thing to do. I just don't think that we should have been so doggone obsessed with fixing the entire Middle East. I think we should have gotten rid of Saddam and, as part of the deal, established a military base over there and then been done with the damn thing. But maybe I'm wrong about that. The point that I make is, again, on that issue, a major priority of Trump, his position is one that liberals would have tended to support. On the other things that he's done in his administration, tax cuts, well, it's mainstream conservative position. Virtually every American conservative supports tax cuts. It's not something that came way out of right-wing Looneyville or anything. Eliminating government regulations. Regulations on businesses. Again, a mainstream position that 95% of American conservatives support. Liberals may not like it, but again, it's not any kind of an extremist type position. So, well, what about the border and immigration? Well, until a few years ago, Trump's position on the border is the same position that everyone had. We've played so many times the cut of Bill Clinton from the 90s talking about the enforcement of the border. Bernie Sanders in 2000 what year was it? I think 2016, Bernie said, of course you have to have a border. This notion that anybody can come in and we're not enforcing anything, that's a brand new notion. Barack Obama had his detention camps at the border, as we know. Then you can say, well, Trump was taking a more extreme position and trying to build a wall. Well, not everybody agreed with it, but again, lots of people hold that position that we should have a wall. It's, again, not this way out of nowhere position. I don't think anyone would say, for example, that Donald Trump is more conservative than Ted Cruz. They would differ on some issues. Some issues, Cruz might be more traditionally conservative. On others, Trump would be more of a hardliner. But remember, Ted Cruz was the guy who essentially finished second in the Republican nomination. The last three to be standing other than Trump were Cruz, Rubio, and Kasich. Rubio eventually bowed out. Kasich, I think, is still running. John Kasich is still bitter and whining and crying and complaining. The point that I make here, and I could go through all the other things, is Donald Trump's stands on the issues, while his own style and his own take different from some Republicans on some things and so on, they're certainly within the mainstream of American contemporary political thought. There isn't anything radical about any of them. What some of them were different, particularly, well, we're going to stop carrying NATO's water and so on, but it's not by any means an extremist position. So what are they all bonkers about him for? Well, I know this. It's not the tweeting, and it's not the fact that he criticizes the media. I'm talking about these really, the so-called deep state, the real power brokers, the reason that the FBI was willing to try to frame Trump with the Steele dossier and creating the excuse to pretend that there was Russia collusion. The reason that so many of the big giant tech companies desperately want to have him out. The need that so many on the left now feel to silence conservative speech because they don't want to do anything that would allow Trump and his supporters to be able to communicate. What is it about Trump that they so deeply seem threatened by? Remember this about presidents. Ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt stayed in office until he finally croaked, you can't serve more than 2 terms. They changed the Constitution because of Roosevelt. When we put in a constitutional amendment, the Constitution now says you can't serve more than 2 terms as President of the United States. It was done because people were mortified that Franklin Roosevelt kept running and winning. And had Roosevelt not died, maybe Roosevelt at 250 would still be our president. Who knows? So worst case scenario for the establishment figures is Donald Trump's the president until January of 2025. Worst case scenario, right? The beauty of the American system is you can get rid of people that you don't like, and with term limits for president, the presidency is one of the few major jobs we have in this country that is term limited. No particular president anymore can serve a long period of time. And even though there was no limitation prior to Roosevelt, prior to Franklin Roosevelt, no president had ever served more than 2 terms. 8 years has been the max prior to Roosevelt. He's the only guy that ever served more than 8. So what are they so afraid with Trump over, particularly given the fact that Trump hasn't done anything particularly radical or threatening to, and prior to the COVID thing that was coming down, America was doing just fine as a country. Why are they so wigged out over him? Well, I believe I know the answer. If I didn't believe I knew the answer, why would I bring this up as a topic?
St. Charles, tell me tonight, won't you tell me about love?
Very good song this is, St. Charles. You never play this as bumper music. It only occurs to me the songs you don't play is when I hear one that you never play very much, because why would it occur to me? Because I don't ever hear it. Oh, yeah, that's right. This is on a... You've been making... yeah, this is a good song. This was back in the time in which Jefferson Starship, not to be confused with Starship, there was a little bit of overlap in the members, different band though. Jefferson Starship was most of the people that were in the Jefferson airplane, and they're just huge, kind of the classic rock was in its heyday. In other words, before it was classic rock, when it was just the rock of the day, late 70s. That's when they did that. Their biggest album was Red Octopus. This St. Charles, I think, was on the album that came out after Red Octopus, which wasn't as big of a hit. But in fact, I even remember when Red Octopus came out, I was in Milwaukee. I didn't live here at the time, but WKLH played it from end to end. It was such a big deal that they that it came out. Anyway, this segment is about Dwight Eisenhower. You just said you were going to talk about why they hate Trump. Why? I'm an analytical person. I think to be a good talk show host, you have to be, because if you can't analyze things and figure things out and you can't give people a take that they might not get somewhere else, what's the point of anybody tuning in to listen to them? So I've been probing this because clearly the venom directed at Trump, especially if indeed they are willing to use the military to get him out of office, they're open to this notion of just a wholesale. I mean, this thing that we're going to have with the mail-in vote, we are set up for an enormous constitutional crisis. It's just going to happen. Trump is going to win the popular vote. He's going to win the electoral vote. These ballots are going to come in after the fact. People are going to go to the courts and they're going to have boxes of ballots that nobody knows where they came from, and they're going to be people demanding that they be counted. All this crap is going to happen. And Trump has been warning people about the mail-in ballot thing forever. Talk show hosts like me have been warning about the mail-in ballot thing forever, and it's not dawning on, I think, most conservatives how bad this problem is going to be and how easily fraud can be committed after the fact with mail-in ballots. And it's all going to be ballots that start showing up 5 days after the election that some court is going to say you have to count without regard to what the law states. Anyway, if they're willing to do all of those things, it indicates just a level of obsession with Trump that things have happened to Trump that have not happened to any president before. You could say that they hyped up the charges against Nixon, that Watergate in the end wasn't that serious. People can debate that one way or another. I think it was serious. But to have the FBI try to frame a president, to have the Mueller investigation for 2.5 years pursue something that it knew didn't exist, to literally tank an economy by overreacting to COVID, killing your own cities. All, I think, with just roots in this, the way they despise Trump. And I'm not talking here the media, and I'm not talking about some guy who lives down the street from you. I mean what we've been referring to as deep state, the really, really powerful permanent establishment governing class in Washington and elsewhere. Well, I think it comes down to two things about Trump that threatened them. I mentioned a moment ago Dwight Eisenhower. It's unfortunate that history has become a politicized thing. The kids aren't taught actual history because American history is fascinating. And the Eisenhower period, fascinating. One of the greatest TV shows ever, and when I watched it the second time, I realized that Mad Men was a great TV show. When I watched it, you know, when you watch a show for the first time around, it takes 9 years because this was not a, you couldn't binge watch Netflix or Mad Men when it came out because, you know, there'd be a season and then you'd have to wait a year for season 2 and so forth and so on. Now you can binge watch it now, but when people who watched it when it actually came out, it took years to go through the series, and you'd watch a show 1 week and then another one would be on a week later. They didn't have it all released to download on one day the way the stuff is done. Now, Netflix was, but the Mad Men, I should say, was set in the 1960s, but it was all about reacting to how America was rebelling from the period of the 50s, which was the time that Eisenhower was the president. The most famous speech Dwight Eisenhower ever gave, remember, Eisenhower had never been involved in politics when he ran for president. He was the general who ran the European operation in World War II. and used that as the launching pad to 7 years after the war run for president and won. He's one of the few American presidents, he fits in the category of Trump, who came into the presidency without having been involved in politics prior to that. Eisenhower gave a very, very famous speech. It's his most famous, and it's one of the most famous presidential speeches of all time, in which he warned of the military-industrial complex. It was unusual that Eisenhower would give that speech because Eisenhower came out of the military. I mean, he was top major general. I don't mean major general in terms of that was his rank. I mean, he's a big-time general. He's a big deal. Trump personified the military. There are 3 or 4 generals that came out of World War II that just became epic figures. Omar Bradley, MacArthur, Eisenhower, etc. Patton. He warned the nation of this growing linkage between the military and giant industry. And he warned of the implications of it. Until the last few years, I never knew what Eisenhower was talking about. Okay, we have a military and we have defense contractors. If you're going to have a military, somebody's got to build tanks, somebody's got to build aircraft, so what? What Eisenhower, I think, was trying to tell us is that for the industrial complex that depends on military spending, they were always going to have to push for more military spending. Otherwise, how do they make money? They make the stuff that the military buys. And therefore, our public policy is going to be driven by what's good for those corporations. It was kind of a lefty thing for, when you think about it, Eisenhower to warn against, but our politics is a little reversed back then in terms of war. It was the Democrats were the war party. They were the party that presided over World War II, and they're the party that got us into Vietnam. If anything, there was more isolationism from the Republicans. But anyway, Eisenhower warned about that. Now let's go to now. Trump threatens what had become the general American status quo of both parties with regard to the use of the military. Trump doesn't believe in fighting all these wars. He doesn't believe that we ought to be buying all the tanks and equipment for NATO. Do you understand how much of the so-called deep state is so ingrained in that type of globalism? The giant multinational corporations, that old term, the New World Order that Bush came up with. There are people who deeply believe in this notion that, and I'm not talking like a conspiratorialist here, I'm just honestly assessing the situation, who believe that we have to have some senior nations governing and maintaining control and order of the world, and they want that to be the United States. And some of the people who believe this are the people who make money off of it. It's not been the issue that's gotten a lot of attention, but Trump again and again has made it clear that he does not want to see just pulling more troops out of Iraq. He's not for this. And he's in particular not for us bankrolling. And he doesn't believe we ought to be protecting Japan, and when Japan is too cheap to put in its own military. Japan still doesn't have nuclear weapons. The defense that Japan has against China is us. In terms of Japan, why are we defending Japan? They could be our ally, but why are we paying for them now, 75 years after the World War II's over? This position threatens all of the policymakers, think tank people, giant corporations that benefit off of government defense. And remember, defense spending isn't just a tank. It's these computer systems, the information systems, the nav systems, all of that stuff. Second issue. There's an issue out there, and I'm going to give it to you after we come out to the break, and I want you to think about it during the break. I use the break sometimes to make you think along with me. There's another giant issue, a public policy issue. By and large, both political parties have been on the same side, the same general area on. And Trump's broken ranks with them. It's not the hardest question, but think about it during the break. It's 403 News Talk 1130 WIS. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. We've been discussing just what is it about Donald Trump that creates this desperate need by really the permanent governing class. It's been called the deep state, the swamp. That kind of linkage that goes from George Soros through Warren Buffett, through the lifers in the Justice Department and the CIA and the State Department, heads of some of the big multinational corporations. This loathing that they have for Donald Trump and the willingness that they've shown to do literally anything to get rid of him. Because most of his policy positions are within the mainstream of American thought. I've mentioned, first of all, the one. Trump is one of the few presidents, really since Eisenhower, who seems to think maybe we're spending way too much money on equipment and junk to protect the rest of the world that doesn't have anything to do with the United States. Well, that's a fortune that's being spent, and it's also a fortune in influence that we're involved in. Just think of how much money Hunter Biden made off of one tiny little country, the Ukraine, when they got their beak involved in that. Having the United States being involved everywhere creates an opportunity for a lot of people to butt their noses in and make money off of it. What's the other issue? There's another issue, and it's the one I teased going into the break, where there's a political issue that we have out there that pretty much leaders of both parties have been on the same general page for decades. And Trump's on a completely different page. And that's China. Republicans or Democrats have gradually sucked up and cozied up and made stronger our relationship with China ever since Nixon. And as you know, I think Nixon's one of the worst presidents in American history. I think some Republicans overrate him. Nixon was the guy that pursued détente with the Soviet Union, guaranteeing that we'd have years more of the Cold War, which Russia was winning until Ronald Reagan came in and reversed it. And it was Nixon that introduced that cancer onto the planet of China by welcoming them into the civilized world. With the same naivete that I think George W. Bush had in believing that if you bring some of these nations out of the shadows and into the civilized world, they have to conform themselves and behave more properly. That didn't work with any of the nations that Bush tried to deal with, and it has not worked with China. China has not changed or modified its behavior at all. Forced sterilizations, banning of religions. They're really, well, you know, it's good that they're going to get Hong Kong because Hong Kong's the jewel of the world. They aren't going to mess that up. They're going to keep the freedoms that are in place in Hong Kong. Yeah, right. I understand a lot of people thought that, you know, that notion made sense. That if they want to be part of the civilized world, they got to behave civilized. That made sense. But we've now watched for 50 years exactly how this plays out. China is a monstrously immoral nation. But both political parties have pursued this relationship with it because there are a lot of things that, at least in the short and intermediate term, are in the American interest. China isn't just a source of cheap labor. It's got 1.3 billion people and a growing middle class. That's a lot of individuals and a lot of buying power for all sorts of businesses to deal with. For American manufacturers, the cost of making a product in this country is very, very high. Well, let's make everything over there in China. Then the banking relationships, the long-term trade implications, there's just so much that's moved back and forth between here and China. Trump comes in and he had this notion, you know, he had these ideas that some people thought odd before he ran for president, that China was this big problem, that we can't just have our country outsourced to China, that China was getting involved and had its tentacles everywhere. Trump went in and he said, we're getting screwed on trade. And I've argued this forever. China never does what we want, but we don't, we never stand up to them because we want to maintain this trading relationship with them because it's good for American business. Well, whether it's good for American business or not, China is doing things that are in the long term not good best interest of the United States, including bankrolling Korea. Trump gets in, look, China needs us more than we need them. I'm going to cut a better deal. Then the virus comes along. Because China's messing around with viruses in the lab in Wuhan, which I still think is what happened. I don't think it was a deliberate release, but I think that they're messing around with viruses to see what they can do with them. And one of them somehow gets out of there. Bunch of Chinese get sick. China doesn't want to let on how many people are getting sick over there, and they don't really care because they got 1.3 billion people. They can lose some. But the thing starts filtering over to the United States, and Trump identifies the problem here and says, look, this thing came from China, and tries to cut things off with China and has been pounding on China ever since. This bothers a lot of powerful people for whom the relationship with China is a critical thing. These, again, one world government types, they want the United States and China and all these others to sort of get together and put your heads together, kind of micromanage the world. There's truth to that. Without being a conspiratorial wacko, there are people who believe that. In addition to that, there are so many businesses in which China is essentially the guts of their operation. Nike might be based in Oregon, but Nike is a Chinese company. There's nobody making Nike shoes in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a monstrously huge company that is entirely dependent on all of its products being made in China and a huge percentage being sold in China. China uses American sports figures as the brand identity of essentially a Chinese company. One of the things that Trump deserves an incredible amount of credit for is this. China is one of those issues that he could have easily left alone. Why mess with this? It's not worth the crap I'm going to get for dealing with it. He decided because he believed, for all the people, Donald Trump doesn't believe in anything. Donald Trump just loves himself. Donald Trump deeply believes the Chinese thing is a problem because if he didn't, he wouldn't have been picking this fight because it's been nothing but trouble for him. All this crap he's getting, this is being driven, I think, by China and the people who have a vested interest in maintaining our cozy relationship with China. Look at the number of hotels in the United States that have been built with Chinese money. I forget the name of the visa program, but they got this deal where you get 25 Chinese people can come into the United States on visas if you invest a certain amount in an American real estate project. It's one of those H programs and so on. And again, it's not the worst thing in the world. If China has all this money, we'd rather have them investing it in the United States than investing it in France, right? And if we get these hotels because there's capital, that capital is now in the United States, it's a good thing. As opposed to us building all these factories in China. It's not the end of the world if China starts putting money into the United States and improving our economy, but you start messing with that and it affects the people who had access to that Chinese capital. Trump's messing with all that. And a lot of people don't like it. They're deeply threatened by it. Trump believes that China is hell-bent on world domination, and so do I. Trump believes that China is trampling all over the United States and is not respecting American sovereignty and is not respecting really the goodness or greatness of our nation that we're being taken advantage of here. And I think he's right. But I think those two issues, the downsizing of the American military footprint so that we're not out there putting American lives on the line and American dollars on the line to protect the rest of the world, but only to protect our own vital interests, and a reset of the China relationship. And look, Trump has accomplished. It's amazing how much he's accomplished in China in the last 3 years. Look at the number of companies that have pulled their product pipeline out of China and are now making things in the United States or elsewhere. The China thing is all screwed up. You know that there could be a virus out of China, this thing out of China, and a number of these companies have just reassessed. Maybe China has too much trouble for its own good. We've moved a lot of our supply chain out of China. Trump has gotten all of that done. That was the whole thinking behind Apple pressuring Foxconn to try to build a plant in the United States so that Foxconn wouldn't be making all this Apple stuff in China. Some of these companies themselves were a little bit freaked out over the whole thing. So Trump, by the pressure that he's placed on this Chinese trade relationship, has moved production around and has brought a lot of it back to the United States. And it was one of the reasons why our economy was just doing so spectacularly well before, conveniently enough, COVID came around from China. I understand you talk about this long enough and you can sound like one of these wingnuts that sees a conspiracy under every pillow. But this stuff is kind of basic stuff. There are many people who passionate, and there's sincerity in their position. They believe that the Chinese-American relationship is vital, that there's so much money in China and one is good for the other, and Trump's screwing the whole thing up, that we ought to work with the Chinese. Okay, fine, they're dictators, they don't believe in God and all of that stuff, but so what? They've got, we can work with them, they can work with us, we've dealt with monsters forever and ever. And it's a valid point of view. It's just not my point of view. My point of view has been, okay, fine, China's out there, China's a force in the world, but if we're going to do all this stuff for China, China's got to start behaving like a civilized nation, like telling fat face of North Korea that he can't keep messing around with these nuclear bombs. Like, if American companies are sending products over there to sell, don't let the Chinese knock off and rip off our trade rights. Treat us fairly. I'm not probably as extreme as Trump is on this, but I think that Trump has pulled the scab back, and we see how bad that wound that's under the scab is from China. Messing around with viruses, lying to the world about how many people. I mean, it's an evil nation. It's evil to the core, and its evil has infected us. And Trump has had the guts to take this on. Obama he had a great relationship with China. So did W. Bush. Every political party that goes back, Reagan didn't do anything to China. It's been, look, Bill Clinton was the guy that really expanded. Remember those slugs that he had down there in Arkansas doing their land deals that were his go between John Wong and Charlie Tree and all of these sleazebags? That was the early stages of the bagmen bringing the money over from China. And you go anywhere in the world and we do our cruises, it's just amazing. China's got their money here. China's got their money there. They're trying to buy up the world because, there's only so much growth they can do by owning their own country, China. They've got their influences everywhere, and all this money's moving around. And if you're on the receiving end of the money, Paul and I watch this show Ozark. They haven't had a real Chinese connection into that thing, too. But again, the Chinese are looking for ways to get their money everywhere. Trump is messing with that. And he's been very successful in messing at that. Look at the number of companies that have closed their factories in China and are building things in Mexico, the United States, or elsewhere. This is freaking out those people who want to have China and the United States tied together. So I think those are the two reasons that the establishment despises him. They are not the issues that are on the front burner in terms of public policy, but I think that Trump's trying to not have America be the policeman of the world, that he's made great progress in that in 4 years. Imagine what he can do in a second term. That's the other thing. They know that Trump in a second term will be unfettered. When Trump doesn't have to worry about anything, short of impeachment. You think that the Chinese have had problems with him in the first term, imagine in the second term. And I think everybody knows that, but this explains, I think, the depth from this deep state establishment of hatred that they have over Trump. He's just messing with things that it's sort of wink, wink, nod, nod. Both political parties were kind of okay with. And it's been very courageous that he's done it. The other things that he's done, deregulating the economy, outstanding. Lowering the tax rates so the companies that had all this cash stashed overseas brought it home to the United States. Great thing to do. Pushing for school choice and school vouchers so that African-American children can get out of the terribly rotten urban public schools and get into better schools so we can lower the crime rate and bring affluence to minority communities. Great things. All these things have been outstanding stuff. But those are all issues that are generally within the broad mainstream of American political ideas. The two areas where he has gone off on his own and is really poked into things that neither political party has produced a leader that was willing to do it, have been on this American military footprint everywhere and on China. And the funny thing about it is, even though you'll never hear him say it, on both of those issues, the only other major figure that we've had in America over the last number of years that's been talking about that is Bernie Sanders. So they're not really left or right issues. They're issues about whether or not we are going to allow the desire of some very, very powerful interest to make a ton of money trample over what is in the best interest of the American people. We were on that story several weeks ago, in which I said, I think Black Friday is over. I finally found one good thing to come out of COVID, Paul. That's it. That. Killing that sucker off. I mean, it had been getting out of control. When they went in and they started ruining Thanksgiving, that was bad enough, aside from just that whole notion of training the American consumer to... It's an obnoxious thing to tell people you're going to sell a product to them at a certain price point, but only if you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and elbow your fellow man in the... It's, COVID was the final straw, but as he pointed out, the reality of online purchasing where it's just as easy to buy some of these things online has ended the whole notion of getting into the store early and so on, since they're all willing to sell it online, etc. So that's a good thing. Anyway, let's move on here because we've got a very, very important story to share with you at the beginning of the hour here. At the beginning of the segment, I guess. The Wisconsin State Supreme Court has just, within the last 40 minutes, halted the mailing of absentee ballots in Wisconsin. The issue here is one that I have covered in 2 separate segments this week. It has to do with ballot access by the Green Party and Kanye West. For those of you who weren't listening on yesterday's program, I said that some people might find the issue boring. What's been going on with the Wisconsin Election Commission and how the staff of the Election Commission and the Democrats are trying to steal the presidential election for Joe Biden by not allowing any third-party liberal candidates to be on the ballot. Megan Wolf, who is the executive director of the commission, has said, look, you can't have a court ruling saying that you got to put the Green Party on the ballot and you got to put Kanye West on the ballot because the ballots are being mailed out right now. You can't have an election in which some people's names are on and other people are not. If we mail out a ballot, somebody's going to send it in. You can't have that ballot out there. We've already made a decision. Their names aren't on the ballot. The state Supreme Court today blocked any mailing out of ballots until this issue about the Green Party and Kanye West are resolved. Recognizing some of you don't know what I'm talking about without going through the entire background that we did on yesterday's program, I brought myself fully up to speed on the Green Party. I talked about the Kanye issue. So here's the background of this story, and if you give this 5 minutes of listening to the background, I think you'll find it quite fascinating. The Green Party, what's that? It's a lefty party. It's a third party. They don't get a lot of votes, but they don't get no votes. Many people believe that Donald Trump won Wisconsin only because the Green Party was on the ballot in 2016. Donald Trump carried Wisconsin in 2016 by 22,000 votes. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president, got 31,000 votes. The Democrats and Hillary Clinton's people believe that all of those people who voted for Jill Stein would have voted for Hillary had Jill Stein not been on the ballot. The Democrats play hardball. So they just decided we're not going to let the Green Party be on the ballot this time. Kanye West. All of a sudden, Kanye, who is seemingly half nuts, but also a very fascinating figure, and has developed an alliance with President Trump, suddenly Kanye says he's running for president. Everybody thinks he's doing this to help Trump. I mean, everybody thinks this. And maybe he is, maybe he isn't. The belief is that Kanye, as a popular African-American cultural figure, would siphon black votes away from Joe Biden. A lot? Probably not. But let's imagine Kanye West got 5,000 votes. There are many people who think that the election in Wisconsin is going to be within the margin of 5,000 votes. So the state election commission threw Kanye off the ballot. Both Kanye and the Green Party have gone to court to challenge that decision. Now, for those of you who didn't hear the discussion yesterday, the state election commission has a full-time Madison-based staff. They make recommendations to the commission. The commission consists of 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. Unfortunately, 2 of the 3 Republicans always side with the election commission staff. One of them is Speaker Voss's designee, Dean Knudsen. I have encouraged Speaker Voss to demand his replacement now. I believe that the courts are going to block the two rulings that were made by the Election Commission, meaning that once again, Dean Knudsen's vote will not only have been one in which he sided with the Democrats, but legally indefensible. The other Republican is an old retired county clerk named Marge Bosselman, who got on there because both parties get to have a retired clerk. And Marge is just going to do whatever Megan Wolf and the staff tell her to do so long as Marge gets a coffee refill and a donut. Pathetic that these are the people that are governing our elections, but it is pathetic, and it's also pathetic that state Republican leaders have not done anything to get these two people off of that commission because my side has been trampled over. Anyway, the Green Party says we were wrongly denied the opportunity to be on the presidential ballot. Here was the criteria the Election Commission used to not let the Green Party candidate be on the ballot. They said the nominating petitions for one of the candidates that, when you run for president, you list your president and vice presidential candidates. One of the people on the Green Party ticket in her initial filing for office had one listed address in South Carolina, and in the final filing had a different listed address. The Election Commission said, therefore, the petition is flawed and you can't be on the ballot. The candidate said, I moved. It's a correctable minor technicality. But the Election Commission staff said that's enough not to let the Green Party be on the ballot. The full commission voted 3-3. They deadlock. When there's a deadlock, it means the staff decision stands. The Green Party suing. The Green Party is furious with the Democrats. Remember, the Green Parties are lefties. They're saying, look, this is just brazenly anti-democracy. You've got this commission. They don't want us on the ballot, and they're making crap up to keep us off. Kanye West. The deadline to get your nominated petitions in was 5 o'clock on whatever the Monday was a few weeks ago. His lawyer got in at 5 o'clock in 17 seconds. That's what the timestamp said. They said she was late by 17 seconds. In her lawsuit, she has claimed the doors from the office building the Election Commission is in were locked at 4:30. It took her that long to get into the building. I believe the story. I believe the doors were locked. Rather than, again, benefit of the doubt being toward giving people the opportunity to vote for the candidate of their choice, the Election Commission voted to throw Kanye off the ballot. Conveniently, both presidential third-party candidates thrown off the ballot are candidates that likely would have drained votes from Biden and not Trump. So, Kanye's lawyers are suing. The Green Party is suing. In the meantime, we're only a few weeks away from the election, and we're during the period of time in which we're ready to start sending out the absentee ballots. Now, some people say, I've gotten my ballots. Well, you probably got a ballot request. And if you send in a ballot request, they are beginning the process of starting to mail out the ballots. There's a difference. There's a ballot request, and then there's a ballot. The ballot's the thing you mark and vote on. The ballot request is the thing you send in saying, hey, send me a ballot. See the difference? You understand the difference? One would be like a ticket. The other would be the game. You got to take the ticket to get into the game. You got to send in the ballot request, and they send you a ballot. But how do you have the court rule on whether these two can be on if some ballots have already been sent out? So the state Supreme Court this afternoon issued an emergency order blocking the mailing of any absentee ballots until the court rules on whether the Green Party and Kanye West should be on the ballot. And that would mean that case would have to be expedited to the state Supreme Court, their names being on the ballot within a matter of days, because we've got to start getting these ballots out. I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's September the 18th. Or no, I'm sorry, September the 10th. But that's still, you get my point. The period of time for mailing the ballots in is to begin very, very soon. And we've got these disputes over whether these two candidates should be on the ballot. I think that the decisions to throw both the Green Party off and Kanye West off are indefensible. And clearly, I mean, the candidate has two different addresses. Well, she moved from one point to the other. And apparently that has not, she's on the ballot in numerous other states with the same situation going on. And the thing with Kanye's petition coming in 17 seconds later, the doors, this is right up the lefty playbook. If this was a right-wing candidate that might have drained votes from Donald Trump, I'm just telling you, there's no way that Madison staff would have come up with these rulings. And when you see Republican members of the commission siding with this biased Madison, it's just nauseating to me. My side, once again, has disenfranchised. Now, on the Green Party dispute, The vote was 3-3. The 3 Republicans voted to put the Green Party on the ballot. The 3 Democrats voted to keep it off the ballot. But because it's 3-3, that means the staff decision holds. So you do have the recourse of going to court. But if you can't go to court in time for the election, where's that recourse? So the state Supreme Court decision today is proper. If the commission throws somebody off the ballot and your only recourse is to go to court, you can't send out the ballots until the courts have ruled on that case, correct? So that's what's happened today. It's just breaking right now. It's a very big story. So there. I do a quiz on this, but there's no way to do the quiz. See, if I did have people call up, the only people call up are people who knew that they had it down pat as opposed to me. Like if I was a teacher, I had a professor in college. I think I've told this story 14 times. I may have been obsessed with him. I don't know. You know, which professors, the same, it's the same is true with regard to grade school teachers or high school teachers or coaches. Which are the ones that you remember? Really? I always remember the hard guys. Those are the ones that had the greatest influence on me. The soft touches, the easy A's, and all of that stuff. I in retrospect, I didn't learn anywhere near as much as I did from the demanding ones. You disagree with that? Well, I thought you meant like the good, nicety nice ones. I mean, like the kind of hard line. Yeah, often the good teachers were the ones that were demanding, and that's what I'm saying. Well, there's this guy that. I'm pretty sure there's a guy who works at our building here who was in the same class that I was in. I won't name him, but he's long dead. I had respect for him, even though I'm pretty sure he couldn't stand me. You know, the senior level class that we had, which in my major was probably the only hard class. Mass communications is not a hard major. I mean, imagine. I mean, you're running a TV camera and you're citing constitutional law and free speech. It's not rocket science. But the toughest class is this mass media and modern society. The way the guy would do the lectures is he'd use that, what do you call it when you question? The Socrates method, or what do they call that thing? Socratic method? I don't know. He'd be going through this thing and he'd ask, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? And going through all these things that we had read, and he's challenged you and so on. And here's the way the racket worked in this class. He said, okay, on such and such about the Constitution or whatever, and he'd want people to answer the question. Everybody would put up their hands if they knew the answer, right? Well, this guy, he would only call on you if you didn't have your hand up. That's because you kind of, I don't know this, and you're trying to recede into your chair. It's remarkable how he could just like read your face and kind of tell if you didn't know the answer. I swear he got jollies out of it. If you didn't know the answer, if he thought you didn't know the answer, he'd call upon you so you'd weasel around and squirm around and to try to make some crap up or, do the deal. Well, that's the kind of quiz I would like to keep rather than find the people who I think did not properly follow the discussion I have and make them answer the question. But given the fact that you're out there in, Radio Land, I can't do so. So why ask the question if everybody's going to get it right? I get no thrill out of correcting the person. That's why I sometimes ask the question out of you, because you would get the question wrong. Well, it's no fun if everybody gets it right, is it? I guess not. All right, we will move on. Again, state Supreme Court halting until there can be a ruling on the access to the ballot of the Green Party and Kanye West for president. And it's a big deal, as I say. I mean, there isn't anybody who doesn't think Trump versus Biden in Wisconsin is going to be close. And the Hillary people are just convinced that the Madison lefties who voted for the Green Party made Donald Trump win Wisconsin last time by taking away those votes that would have gone to Hillary Clinton. And they just don't want any credible third-party candidate or anybody with any name recognition on the ballot. And that denial that occurred from the Election Commission, as I say, on the nitpicky nature of it, I think the Supreme Court is going to put both names back on the ballot. But in this case, by the way, Hagedorn sided with Brian Hagedorn, who's now the swing justice on the court. He did side with halting the mailing of the ballots out, but how he votes on the actual decision as to whether the names are on the ballot again, no one really knows. He has freaked out a lot of Wisconsin conservatives who fear that he's sort of the Wisconsin version of John Roberts, somebody who ran as a conservative, but at best is only a swing, is going to flop back and forth. It's too early to make a permanent decision on that, but how he rules in this case will be a pretty good tip-off. 445 News Talk, 1130 WISN. I have a River Hills story. I got to do that. All River Hills stories are funny. It's like all Elm Grove stories sort of have to be funny, right? Well, I mean, but why Sheboygan? Sheboygan's a normal middle-class community. I guess I'm referring to hoity-toity, uppity kind of story. I mean, when is River Hills going to have a story that isn't going to just be kind of goofy, if you know what I mean, right? I mean, still the biggest scandal is when a certain basketball player's big giant dog ate Mrs. Pettit's little Fluffy, and that one they're still yapping about up in River Hills. But before we get to that, I want to follow up on the discussion that we were having on yesterday's program. It was based on a couple of columns that are out there about the long-term ramifications of COVID-19 in terms of gutting the gig economy, killing off entry-level jobs, and so on. The big losers are younger people. Even considering the amount of stimulus that's being passed, which is, whether you're on the right or the left, dramatically adding to the national debt. What do you care about the national debt if you're 80? You might care about because you don't want your children to have a terrible future. But the people that are 30 that are staring at a country that might potentially have to default or incredibly inflate its currency just to pay its debt is a significant issue for them. In other words, the point was, the way we have shuttered everything down and killed off the economy and made these radical changes in society because of COVID, the big losers are millennials, people in their 20s and their 30s who are going to have to be cleaning up from this mess for the next 20 years. Yet, I've commented that the people that seem to be the greatest supporters of all the lockdowns and the restrictions are the very millennials. In other words, the ones who almost certainly will not get sick, but are paying the price of the lockdowns. Yet their support, the common sense would be, the older you are, maybe even a guy like me, oh yeah, shut it down or I'm going to croak. What's somebody 30 worried about? We're ruining the country for them, ruining their future, larding them up with debt, killing off all sorts of industries that they were intending to go in, killing the restaurant industry that many of them work in, killing the performing arts industry that many of them work in, killing off all the things that they like to go to. Who goes to all this stuff? Younger people doing all of this, much of which will never come back for something they can't get. As always occurs, whenever I discuss anything that pertains to millennials, I have heard from 97 million millennials. They're very self-referential. You hear in particular from millennials who understand that their generation's kind of screwy. I'm just going to share one of the many here. It's interesting. They all millennials, when they respond, write too long, but it's just part of the millennial thing. They're very self-referential. But as I say, they're generally very well-spoken, and one of the things they are is introspective. I won't name him because I don't like to name people, but he writes, Mark, I'm writing you regarding the comments that you made about the average millennial and younger generation mindset regarding our current situation. I know from firsthand experience that you aren't far from the bullseye. As a 22-year-old married homeowner, first of all, he's not typical here at all. Also, I should comment, at the age of 22, there's people, some people say they're not millennials, they're Generation Zs. What? I know, I'm just saying that somebody's going to have to come up with the hard and fast ruling on that, because if you Google out where the data point starts, not everybody agrees on it. Anyway, he's pointing out he's just younger. He's not saying I'm a millennial. In other words, as a 22-year-old married homeowner working in a skilled trade and investing in a small business, do you know how few people that are 22, married, investing in a business and working in the trades? There's like 7 of him. So even though I'm not naming him, probably everybody who's 22 who knows the guy knows exactly who this is, because who else is going to fit that category? Should I repeat the beginning of the sentence for the 5th time? As a 22-year-old married homeowner working in a skilled trade and investing in a small business, I am seen as the weirdo for not only doing the complete opposite of what I was told by teachers and peers, but having the audacity to question principles and develop opinions that aren't recycled from college professors and celebrities. And again, a very good comment by him. saying, look, I'm 22 and I'm thinking for myself. You don't understand how odd that makes me among my peers. For instance, my high school years were viewed as the guy with long hair that plays in a band and was crazy enough to drive around in old cars lacking such safety comforts as airbags or computer sensors. I take great pride in my efforts of retro revival, long collared Western shirts and all. Generally speaking, in other words, this is an independent thinker for his generation, and he's almost, this is his badge of honor that he's doing all this retro stuff. Generally speaking of us as a generation, we were always encouraged to steer away from any sort of risks. Now, again, I've made this comment repeatedly, and I think it has extra credibility when you get a younger person, in his case, 22 years old, talking about what it's been like being raised in this environment. Steer away from all risks. And we've just commented on this so much that certainly characterized the millennials. We don't know if it's going to have the same impact on the Generation Zs, but I come from the generation in which nobody steered me. I don't swear nobody steered me away from any risk. 14, go sneak into a bar and see if somebody will serve you, get drunk. Maybe we got yelled at over that, but nobody did anything about it. Back to his thing. Hence, the reason why the millennials do not contest any government overreach is because they were not generally taught in the schools to think for themselves. As you can clearly see, excellent observation. There's been no questioning or challenging of any of this. Okay, put a mask on. Okay. Well, he says, look, the generation that I was part of, and even the ones older than me and the millennials, they were never taught to think for themselves. They were instead given all of these truisms from on high and just, this is the way it is. Exactly as they're trying to do now with regard to the Black Lives Matter curriculum. You must think this way. Now, back to his piece. In most cases, anything outside of the concept of adopting left-leaning views, attending a four-year college, and being obsessed with tech is deemed either strange or flat-out absurd. Therefore, when someone tells them that they should do something, they perform the task without hesitation, unless it goes against their common ideals. In other words, somebody says do something, they all do it unless it challenges these things that we all think. Of course, there are fellow conservative minds in my age group, but they don't exactly know who to turn to for any reassurance. I pointed this out a lot about the need for visibility. I try to advocate your program and the station in general, but they kind of still see it as an old man way to go. For the young conservatives I know, there really is no way of banding together to resist the left-wing circus. As for the teenagers, I can agree for the most part about your views on them as well. I've commented that they don't seem to be as safety conscious, and from what I've seen of teenagers, they think this whole COVID thing is a load of crap. He points out, my window of sampling today's teenagers is my 15-year-old brother. He and a considerable number of his friends find the overreaction to COVID to be just ludicrous, and the Democratic Party to be, quite frankly, a load of crap. Now, again, it's anecdotal evidence that this guy is citing. He's talking about his brother and his friends, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a large group of people that were 29 that thought that this COVID thing is all an overreaction, that the Democrats are a load of crap, and he's saying it's common among the teenage friends of his brother. My brother is not the ambitious teenager I was regarding politics, but he developed his opinions mostly on his own by watching those around him. My cousins around his age feel the same way as well. They too feel ostracized for thinking the way they do. Granted, I do not know how far that extends among their peers. I will say that I am very glad to see that they are breaking away from the norm in that instance. And then he thanks me for the program. Again, I got a lot of these, and they're all kind of from the same thing, and they all sort of reinforce the reason that so many younger people in this millennial age group have just bought into the COVID thing and bought into the lockdowns and think that it's socially irresponsible not to do all of this stuff is because they have been culturalized to believe that left-wing politicians and left-wing experts know better than them, and They don't break away from any kind of pack at all. And another theme that was in here is, Mark, you've got to understand that this is from millennial. I got so many of these, that we have always done things as groups. And it's characteristic of them. Everybody knows about the millennials. They always hang together. They don't date. They hang out with the groups. And say, we do things as groups. So therefore, nobody really wants to be the odd one out who doesn't do what everyone in the group does. If the group has 6 people and five of them adamantly believe we have to do these lockdowns and the mask and the whole thing, if you're not one of them, you're not in the group, you don't fit in, we don't like, well, nobody wants to take it. So lots of thoughts as to how that is. The long-term consequence is the same mistake that all these liberal politicians and so many others are making, is you don't have an end game for this, and the long-term ramifications of the lockdown, you have not considered the damage that's being done, just as in the healthcare community, we have not considered all of the health problems that are occurring because we have prioritized COVID over everything else. We have not focused on the increased drug abuse, the mental health issues, the despair that is occurring in people's lives. We just said, COVID, we got to stop we got to stop COVID from spreading. We got to stop COVID from spreading, not considering that all these other problems that you are creating and trying to deal with the one thing that you have. So perhaps I'm overly harsh in suggesting that somebody is 30 ought to figure out, hey, you're the one getting screwed by all of this, not necessarily me, and especially not somebody who's 90. When we have all of these experts who can't understand that they're screwing themselves now. People who, the public health directors, do this. Well, you're screwing up the public health. You're trying to control COVID, and you're creating a bunch of drug addicts and people that are involved in depression that have gained 35 pounds because they're sitting home eating the crap that comes out of the pantry, etc. I still haven't figured that out exactly. What's your theory as to why people have gained weight during this lockdown? Is it because they're sitting at home and they're bored, so they just grab food to eat? That and depression, because I've not had that. I've gone the other direction during this. On the other hand, I'm not locked down at home. I still come to work every day, etc. And I'm no more depressed now than I've been every other. Yeah, the lack of hope and all of that. You can't, nothing to do and so on. And I mean, I do. I know a number of people who apparently say that they like working at home. I probably could have rigged up a deal to do my show from. I just don't want to. I mean, why do I want to sit at home? It's easier to do it from here. Plus, if I had to sit home every day, maybe I would just keep going to the fridge and slopping this down. And, when you're at work, you don't usually go into the station kitchen and just munch. But if you're at home, you walk past, there it is. So that's probably, well, again, the consequence of, and that's a bad thing. The consequence of doing all of these things that are bad for public health, all in the attempt to address the one thing that I don't think that they've addressed at all. I still think the best way to deal with COVID is to let the people who are going to get it, and work it through the same way that we have approached every virus like COVID in the history of man until this one. And all of these experts who say they know best, well, like I say, why didn't you come up with that approach in 2009, when we had an outbreak of the flu that was very, very similar to COVID? A lot of people keep going back to the fact that the worst flu that we've had in the last 75 years is the Hong Kong flu, and we let Woodstock go on through the middle of that thing, and nobody seemed to think that there was any sort of issue. But when you talk about 50 years ago, you may as well talk about 50 million years ago. That's how much our society has changed. I mean, I marvel over the fact that 75 years ago we could have had a country that was willing to accept hundreds of thousands of people dying in World War II and would have accepted as bodacious a military strategy as invading the European mainland from sea, knowing that we were just going to kill most of those people. I mean, the thing that when people go and do the Normandy tours, the D-Day tours and so on, they all come back and say the same thing. I'm blown away by all those headstones. Realizing all of those are all people that died because we just decided that we were going to let the first few waves of boats and the first few paratroopers be cannon fodder. Let most of them get killed knowing that some would break through and eventually we'd have so much that we would overpower the Germans, but we're going to let the first whole wave of them mostly get killed. I mean, this country accepted that. Now, we can't accept the notion that a few people might get sick from this virus. We're completely a different society and a different culture, and the notion of safety and the avoidance of death at all costs is what's driving this. And when I say at all costs, those costs are creating all sorts of other problems, public health, societal, economic, mental health, that I contend are worse. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. I said I had a River Hills story for you. For those of you who are not from southeastern Wisconsin, River Hills is like the old money suburb. It's actually in Milwaukee County. It's on the North Shore, but not on the lake. It's as far north as you can go. If you go any farther north, you're going to be in Mequon. Imagine where I-43 is and now go west of I-43 between Brown Deer Road and, say, the county line. That's where River Hills is. A lot of the country clubs are either in or abut the River Hills area. It's a lot of really, really large lots. I'd say 5 acres is probably almost the minimum for them. It is minimum. And the houses are very, very old and just all wooded. And if you drive through on the streets in there, almost all the homes are gated and so on. Well, and that's how River Hills has wanted to maintain their community. As I said, the southern edge of River Hills is Brown Deer Road. Actually, take that back. I think it might go all the way down to Good Hope, one of the two. But other than those two main drags that sort of run through the area, Good Hope and Brown Deer, it's these pastoral tucked into, you got a curb and this, that, and the other thing. They have never wanted retail. They have never wanted multifamily. They just want to have what they have. There were some farms that were located in River Hills, and there's an old farm property that's located on Brown Deer Road that the family wants to sell to a developer. The property is 1700 West Brown Deer Road. Now, if you know Brown Deer Road, that's the farthest north big east-west main drag you have in Milwaukee County, Brown Deer Road. I think it's 8800 North. So several years ago, the family that owned the property sold it to a developer for the purpose of putting in a big apartment complex. It's called the Eder family property. The developers asked to have the property rezoned so that they could go to a multifamily. They wanted to set up lots that would be smaller and do the multifamily thing, and River Hills said, no, we're not going to do it. The developer sued, claiming that it was simply an arbitrary denial, that you can't set up zoning so that the 5 acre minimum for an entire community is ridiculous. So you got the developer and the family that's trying to sell because they want to sell for $3 million, suing River Hills, and River Hills saying, well, we're not going to let you do it. According to the Business Journal, the case has been settled out of court. This settlement is beautiful in terms of understanding everything you need to know about River Hills, which, as I say, even though it's a very small community, the people that live there are very, very wealthy. Do you take a guess what the settlement is? River Hills just bought the property. So that the family gets their money, we'll just pay the same amount of money to the family and we'll buy it, and now River Hills owns the property. So they essentially got their price. River Hills doesn't have to worry about the multifamily. River Hills is going to be giving $2.5 million to the Eder family, buys the property. There aren't going to be any apartments there. They just bought up the property. Now, if I own the property next door, I just figured out a way to add $2.5 million out of River Hills. The lawyers involved, these are the two biggest real estate lawyers probably in the state of Wisconsin. Alan Markovitz, who's very well known. He represented River Hills, and the Eder family was represented by Bruce Block, who I should mention is a conflict of interest, who has represented me in the past. And they carved out the deal that makes sense for everyone. River Hills has the money and doesn't want the apartments. The Eders don't care if there's apartments. The family members just want to have their money. Case closed, $2.5 million. So much for that. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. Coming up in a little bit, a brand new feature on the program. We're calling it the Mark Belling Weekend Football Preview. We will not be doing the football picking contest this year, but Mike Merlet of American Sports Analyst will join me as we'll talk about 2 or 3 big games in the football season. We'll spend a few minutes previewing the weekend action. I don't feel comfortable making any predictions right now. I'm not as focused like a lot of people have been on the sport. We don't know how it's going to be different with no fans. A lot of college teams are not playing. Some are. So rather than waste time with me and Paul just guessing around here, and also having an audience contestant when some people are very soured on football, we're just going to have a little discussion each week, taking a look at what's going on and whatever the big stories or the big games would be to focus and highlight on. We have a new sponsor, Holiday Motors, which is the big automotive group in Fond du Lac, will be our sponsor. So we'll be doing that in a little bit. Let's start with this. Like many schools, Franklin is not allowing fans to attend any of their fall sporting events. Franklin High School will not allow any fans to go to any athletic events, including, and I love this. In fact, I want you to think along with me on this without belaboring the point. Of all the sports that they have in high school, what would be the one that would be the easiest to have fans at during this period of COVID and social distancing and so on? Paul said football. Oh, no. Way easier to have fans at. All the sports they have in high school. For one thing, football actually has people who want to go to it. What would be there's a sport in which it would be far easier to have the fans socially distanced. I've got it. It's the perfect one. You're on the right track with track and field. You're on the right track. You're on the right track. You literally are. Cross country. They run for like 2 miles. And so they won't even let you, like they usually run through golf courses or through a trail. They won't even allow somebody to stand. You know, how many people would go to a cross? The parents. That's who go. They can't, not even that. So Franklin's not allowing any fans to attend the sporting events. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, we do have a local sports organization that actually has in-person fan attendance. In fact, there have been a few of them this summer. The Slinger Speedway is operating with fans, and the baseball team, the Milwaukee Milkmen, whose stadium is actually in Franklin, southwestern quarter of the country, they have had fans attending their games. That's a semi-professional or a low-grade professional league. The Milwaukee Milkmen has had fans attending their games. They don't allow you to pack the place, but they have a distancing policy, and fans are allowed to attend. So, at last night's Milwaukee Milkmen game, who do you think threw out the first ball? Why, that would be none other than Michael Viuolo, the principal of Franklin High School. The guy who will not allow fans go to watch his kids play goes to a game himself and actually goes out and throws out the first ball. What a bunch of phonies. So, mom and dad can't watch the kid play football. The other kids in the school can't sit one kid over here and another kid over on the 40-yard line. Can't do that. But the guy who runs the school decides that he's going to go to a ball game with fans out there and actually take part and throw out the first ball. And then wander right back into school with all the COVID germs that I'm sure he just got like crazy at the Milkman game. I contacted the Franklin School Superintendent and Viuolo, and neither of them have responded to my questions about why, if you don't think it's safe for fans to go to a game, are you going to a game of a sport and actually taking part in the event? And the person who tipped me off to this said that this is what it's come to with these idiots that are running the schools. They don't even realize how bad they look when they do dumbbell things like this. Deep down in here, I suspect most of these school officials know that these lockdowns are stupid, which is why in their own personal life, the guy is willing to go to a game like this. But when it comes to restricting somebody else's activity, the ability to go, who cares? Cover my butt. Thus, these types of decisions. I've got an interesting story to share with you from, of all places, Joliet, Illinois. What do you know about Joliet, Illinois? I have several facts I could share with the audience about Joliet, Illinois. What do you know about Joliet, Illinois? Nothing. Oh, you do too. You know how your answers are. Whenever you think you don't know something, you actually know things. It just occurs to you 3 seconds later. There's actually lots of things about Joliet, Illinois. Richard Speck was in prison in Joliet, Illinois. So was John Wayne Gacy. They have Illinois has two state prisons in Joliet. One's just outside of Joliet, the other's right in the city. Two separate state prisons. Joliet is like southwest of Chicago, but kind of a distance. It's not really a suburb. Joliet would be to Chicago, kind of like what Kenosha would be to Milwaukee. In other words, part of the overall metro area, but it's quite the haul. The track where they run the NASCAR races is in Joliet, Illinois. And a very, 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 very iconic, famous movie from, I'd say 80-ish, 80 or 81, had a big portion of the movie filmed in Joliet, Illinois. Starred John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. Have it yet? The Blues Brothers. In fact, wasn't one of the characters called Joliet Jake in the movie? I think so, yeah. Anyway, Joliet, Illinois. Joliet's a working class community, as I say. It's got the two prisons. There's also a couple of very big industrial plants and just the most astonishing high voltage transmission power. Joliet just apparently was with the city of Illinois that would take everything. They take the two prisons. There's this high transmission power line contraption that they have outside of there that you... Every time I drove past that on I-55, I worked in Springfield, which is way farther south down there. Every time I drove up I-55 and went underneath those things, I'm telling you, my car would you would literally hear buzzing inside the car. I mean, that can't be good for you. Anyway, Joliet! That's where this story comes from. The local color is just to add to the telling of the story. The Joliet Chamber of Commerce. You needed this background because this is not like, Wisconsin Manufacturers of Commerce, 97 lobbyists, all the staff, etc. The Joliet Chamber of Commerce decided to dig into the numbers that were being put out about COVID in their community. You'd like to think that every chamber of commerce and every business group in the country would be diving into this to see whether or not some of these numbers might be wrong. We've found that in places where the media has dug into them, like Florida, we saw in Florida, two separate labs that only reported positive tests. That was the Fox affiliate in Orlando that broke that story. Remember that one? The more we've dived into these numbers, the more we've realized that some of them are really, really off. The Joliet Chamber of Commerce went in and took a look at the numbers in Will County. Will County is the county that Joliet is in. And again, I would say downtown Joliet's about 60 miles from Chicago. I might be a little high on that, but you get the drift. And they found that the numbers that were being reported for all of Will County for COVID cases was, in fact, COVID positive tests. I have been trying to make this, how many times have I brought up this point that many of these communities are not using cases, they're using tests. This means, according to the estimate from the Chamber of Commerce in Joliet, that their numbers are actually 40% higher than they actually ought to be. Why? Because people get tested more than once. If you get a positive test, they want you to come back to be tested again, and sometimes 2 and 3 times. What they were finding was, when they looked at the numbers, that every positive test, that's the number that was being reported to the state of Illinois from Will County as to the number of people who have COVID. So they were counting positive tests and not cases. It means that they conclude that the numbers in Will County are 40% higher than they actually are. In other words, the reported number is 40% higher than the number of actual people that have the virus. This is worth sharing because this is going on all over America. But there has been no desire on the part of anybody to actually expose it because I believe their agenda has been to make this number look the highest, not to simply give the accurate information to the public as to what's going on. And before we go any farther in this topic, I am now going to pat myself on the back. See this? See me patting myself on the back? Oh, Paul's on the phone there. What are you, being told to stop and pick up some Brown's chicken on the way home, or what's going on in there? You're talking to Merlet. Well, he's not on yet. This thing isn't going on yet. I'm talking to you. Put him on the hold or something. No, Mike Merlet will be on with us in about 5 minutes. Well, I'm glad that he's actually, I shouldn't criticize this. I'm glad he's responsible and ready early rather than some of the goofs that we have that aren't even ready at the time they're supposed to be on, right? Yeah, like that traffic guy that we had to get rid of, who's now, we should come up with some dark reason why John Wyatt's not here anymore and start some sort of rumor. What does he care? He's not going to use that name in his new career anyway, right? Why, yeah, you know doggone well he's going to. Everybody who leaves radio crawls back, don't you? We had Ben Sherman that filled in for us. Ben Sherman was Ben the first traffic guy I had? I think he was, wasn't he? Well, that's controversial. Captain Al, right when I was starting, technically he was the first one. Captain Al was shifting to doing only mornings right when I started, and some people thought he was refusing to do this. No, he was Captain Al, who was a legend in traffic circles. I think Ben was the first to actually do it over the long haul. Well, then Ben's gone off and done other things in his career, but he filled in for John Lake, and he hadn't been on the air 15 years, and here's Ben Sherman on doing the traffic. So that'll be John Wyatt. When I'm doing the show when I'm 92, okay, time for the traffic, and here's some elderly John Wyatt broken down, bitter about life, or still living in Tosa, still can't get himself out. No, I'm patting myself on the back. There aren't many talk show hosts that would have found that story from Joliet, Illinois for you. I'm out there finding stuff like this. And that's my knock on the media. They're not only not out there trying to find interesting material like this, they're looking the other way, trying not to find it. Football preview coming up in a moment. We will have a segment after that for those of you that are wondering, and I want to share some thoughts about mail-in voting. That's going to come up after we do our weekly weekend football preview, which will be each Thursday right around 5:45. Before we go into it real quickly, Paul made a comment yesterday, and I will admit, I'm just not as dialed, like many, just not as focused on who's good, who isn't. In college football, I'm just lost on just trying to find out who's playing and who isn't and so on. Paul said that he watched ESPN, and all the experts were picking the Packers to finish last, which kind of surprised me. And I've done a little bit of reading. There's a lot of people really down on the Packers this year. I mean, I will admit, I just don't know. But Green Bay was 13-3 last year and one game away from the Super Bowl. I mean, usually, some teams drop down and some get better, but I look at the Packers and it looks to me like they got kind of the same team, maybe improved with a couple of guys. I mean, I don't know how you can say you go from 13-3 to last unless you can say they lost 9 players or something or another. So that'll be one of the questions that we put to Mike Merlet when we come back after the break. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. New weekly segment that'll be right around this time every Thursday afternoon. We're calling it the Mark Belling Weekend Football Preview. It's sponsored by Holiday Automotive. That's the big car dealership in Fond du Lac. And if you've ever driven an I-41, you've driven an I-41, haven't you? Drive past it. It's right along the, I was going to say the left side of the road. Well, that's really, really stupid. I'm supposed to read the sheet. Will you let me handle this the way I want to handle it? I'm supposed to read the sheet. I want to do my ad lib here and tell the story. I said it's on the left side of the road. That's an unbelievably stupid thing to say. That would, of course, depend on whether you're going north or south. Right along the freeway, and they've got lots of different brands that they carry. Chevy, Buick, GMC, Mazda, and Ford. And they've got a Cadillac. And of course, the used car dealership, it's worth the drive, Holiday Automotive. So they're going to sponsor this segment for us each week, and we're glad to have them aboard. Joined right now by Mike Merlet of American Sports Analysts in Madison. Well, Mike, you don't have to worry about winning our contest this year because we don't have one. So you and I are just going to chat a little bit about football. Welcome back for another year.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's first year since in 20, I think it started 20 years ago. We haven't had a contest. Too much unknown, I guess, coming into this year, which I completely understand.
Paul brings in the results from last year. Get this out.
Oh, God, don't read those.
Paul, I wonder why Paul brings in the results from last year. This is not a history program, Paul. We're futuristic and we look ahead. My recollection is I won. I had a stroke. What do I know? Anyway, let's talk a little bit about football. First of all, everything is different, and no one really knows what the impact in the NFL with either no fans or virtually no fans in the stands is going to be. College football is really weird because you've got about 40 teams that are playing and about 90 Division I teams that aren't. And there's no rhyme to reason. For instance, Iowa State from the Big 12 is playing, but Iowa from the Big 10 isn't. It's all goofed up. Has this affected? How do you're kind of running blind and trying to figure out who's going to be good and how games are going? Are you guys looking at this week to week? Are you analyzing and trying to see who's going to be a strong team or isn't? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've got a good feel going into the season. It's going to be no different for us going into the season as far as who we think's good, who we think's not good, who's overrated, who's not. I think, there's just fewer teams in college. I mean, we'll handicap the teams who play, and I think we've got a really good feel for everything in the NFL too. I think the difference is going to be as the season moves on, and players are, certain players are out, because of the COVID situation, and now apparently some colleges. I know Oklahoma came out and said they don't want to say who's out because it's going to be a disadvantage to them, and that would just be chaos at that point.
Oh, so they're going to be. As opposed to normally, if a player has a knee injury, they report that, and and now guys just might not come in and so on. You also have the situation where some colleges, there's still talk that the Big Ten, nobody knows what will happen with Wisconsin, would start in October. So teams will come in during the middle of the season and so forth and so on. Real quickly, you're in Madison and close to the situation. Do you think there will be a Badger football season this fall, or have you heard anything? They still have the problem with the city of Madison not giving the clearance to play home games because of mass gatherings. Do you have any feel for what's going on with the Wisconsin program?
Yeah, it's just like everyone else. It's up in the air. I mean, I'm assuming we've heard the same as everyone else. I've heard late October is a possibility. I've heard around Thanksgiving's a possibility. I've heard January 1st is a possibility. And if it was the January 1st one, what we're hearing is there'll be 4 domes in the Midwest. I believe it was St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, and Minneapolis. They'd play in those venues. I don't think there's any way they're going to extend it to the spring. Everything I've heard is that they don't want to disrupt the start of next season, and the coaches and athletic directors and everyone agrees if they start later in the spring, there's just not enough turnaround time.
And there can't really be bowl games or a national championship. I mean, some leagues are playing as normal. I mean, the Big 12 is rolling, and for instance, Notre Dame's playing this weekend. I think the ACC's going, but then the Big Ten's going to start. It's just everybody's on a different page, and it's just this mishmash. Let's move over to the NFL real quickly. The question on the top of everybody's minds is, give us your assessment of the Packers. Paul and I were talking during the break. We're just struck by the number of people that think that the Packers aren't going to be any good. The Green Bay Packers last year were 13-3 and 1 game away from the Super Bowl, yet nationally they're being picked by a lot of experts to finish last in the North, and Paul and I both said it seems like a lot of fans are sour on a team. Usually fans just react to what happened the year before. They were 13-3 and almost went to the Super Bowl, but there seems to be some pessimism about them. Your thoughts on what the Packers are going to be like this year?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Packers will regress. Do I think they're going to finish last in the division? No, I don't think they're going to finish last in the division. Are they going to win 12 or 13 games? I highly doubt it. Just historically, I can go over a few things historically that says that almost never happens. First of all, Green Bay, 13 wins last year, but their point differential was only 3.9 points.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers won so many close games, and then when they lost, they were killed. But they won all those close games. They never really blew anybody out.
No, they were 9-1 in one-score games, basically 8 points or less. They actually got outgained yards per play on the season. They were minus 0.2 yards per play, which is something we look at. Just some stats like that say it's not going to happen again this year. They had a lot of breaks. They had, like you said, close games, 9-1. They were plus in the top 5 in turnover differential. A lot of that stuff normally comes back.
And they had almost no injuries. It was remarkable how healthy the Packers stayed as a team, and that's something that generally doesn't work out. The Packers open the season with a huge game. They play in Minnesota. 2 questions about that. Some quick thoughts about the Packer-Viking game, and also, does home field advantage exist in a sport that essentially has no fans? Or maybe does it make it an even greater advantage, a team playing in their own empty stadium? How do you think there is a home field advantage? How does the lack of fans affect the game? Is there more scoring, less scoring, or does it just not matter?
Well, that's that's something we're going to have to adjust to. My opinion right now is there's not going to be home field advantage. I mean, and it's weird because everyone has the same information and everyone's treating it differently. Like Green Bay, none of the Central NFC North teams are going to have fans. Some teams are having fans. Tonight's game, Kansas City's having fans. But there's only going to be like 12 to 14,000 people. So I don't know how that's...
Which is normally a loud stadium, but instead it'll be a weird-sounding stadium with, as you say, 12,000. I'm sure they'll be roaring, but they're making them sit apart, so they're not even on top of one another in the stadium. So, yeah, that... some people are saying it's going to affect the play calling because, in the past, the crowds would roar and so on. Now everybody's going to hear everything that the other teams are saying, and the offensive players are going to hear the defensive signals that... It's just a brand new thing that it's going to be like watching one of those Division III games on TV where everybody can hear what everybody's saying.
Yeah, it's going to be. That's one thing we are going to have to adjust to as we go on. As far as scoring, is there home field advantage? Does there seem to be as we move forward? Normally, home field's 2.5 to 3 points. I'm going to say it's almost 0 right now.
Yeah, I would just. It seems to me, look at the game and say who you think is going to win, and not worry where the game is being. Where the game is being played. Question about a couple of teams. I think people are fascinated. I know I am, if I can be fascinated by any of this, how the Tampa Bay situation is going to work out. They had a spectacular offense last year, but they're changing the quarterback, and the quarterback is one of the two best-known quarterbacks of the current era. Tom Brady is the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they've got that Bruce Arians dynamic offense. I know they've made additions to their defense. I kind of think they're a Super Bowl contender. Others think Brady's 90 years old and that this is going to be a debacle down there. Do you have any thoughts on Tampa?
Yeah, they're an interesting team, a very interesting team, because as you said, their offense was extremely good last year. The problem was Winston threw 33 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. I mean, that's unheard of.
And Brady throws no picks.
He throws no picks, and he's going to have Gronkowski, which is going to help. Their defense actually 2 years ago was horrible. They were right at the bottom. I think they gave up over 6 yards per play. They improved drastically last year on defense. The problem was they turned the ball over so much because of Winston. I think they're going to be... Brady's going to have as good a skill position players as he's maybe ever had. They've got some really good wide receivers, much better than the New England wide receivers. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. In the first week, they play New Orleans right out of the gate. I mean, that's a huge game.
I see New Orleans is favored by 3 or 3.5 points, and I'm not doing picks right now, but if just glancing, that would have been my pick to take Tampa Bay plus those points against New Orleans. I think Tampa Bay, at some point, Drew Brees has to be too old, but I say that, and Tom Brady's older. I mean, the combined ages of the quarterbacks in that game are about 100.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. The one thing I think New Orleans is gonna really have a chip on their shoulder for this game. I don't think we'll use this game, but I think they'll have a chip on the shoulder because they're hearing everything Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans has owned that division for a while now. So I think they'll have a chip on their shoulder at home. That's going to be a great first game, I think.
Okay. Any one or two games you'd like to talk about, and maybe you will, even though none of the rest of us are going to make picks, if you want to give us a pick that we can use for the weekend, or any other game that you'd also want to mention very briefly.
Sure. Just quickly, I won't give a pick on this game, but the Lions-Bears stay in the NFC North. That's going to be an interesting situation to start. Lions last year started the season 3-4-1, so they were kind of in the mix. And if you remember, Stafford went out halfway through the season, and he was on pace to throw for like 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns. Lions weren't that bad. After he went out, they went 0-8. They lost everything the rest of the way. Their defense was very poor, but they got worn out. They faced more offensive plays than any other team in the NFL, so they got worn out. Chicago, on the flip side, picked up Foles to try and take over the quarterback position, and Trubisky beat him out. So he's going to be starting for Chicago. I think that's going to be an interesting game. Lions opened as a 1-point favorite at home, and it's moved all the way up to 3, so people are wagering on the Lions in that game. I think that'll be a interesting first game for sure to watch.
And a game you'd like to give a pick on, maybe?
Yeah, I'm gonna look at the Jets over Buffalo. I think Buffalo's drastically overvalued coming into the season. If I can get the Jets at +7, right now it's 6.5, a few sevens. If I can get them at +7, I think I'll take the Jets. They've got a really good defense. Their offense struggled last year, but when Darnold was in the game last year, They were actually 7-6. They had a winning record, and they scored many more points when Darnold played. Buffalo's quarterback Allen was the least accurate quarterback in the NFL. He had the most uncatchable throws in the NFL. Their defense is really good. That's just going to be a low-scoring game, I think. And 7 points, if I can get 7, I think it's too much. I think it's going to be a fairly close game like the two were last year.
Many people think this is finally the year that New England doesn't win the AFC East, and everybody has been picking Buffalo to do it, but nobody knows. We don't have time to discuss it this week, but nobody knows how that New England situation, it's not the post-Belichick era. He's there. I think he wants to prove that he can win without Tom Brady, but that's probably the most interesting division to size up is what's going to happen in the AFC East. Anyway, anything that you'd like to tell us about what's going on this weekend at ASA for the first, it's a weird week, but the first full weekend of football?
It is a weird week. I mean, we've had one pick so far and started off good. We had Army last week favored by 3 and they won 42-0. So hopefully we can keep it going. We'll have a small slate of games this week. Just anyone give us a call if they're interested in the season. Our package is $595 for the whole season, everything, which is the cheapest rate we've ever had. So just give us a call in the office if anyone's interested.
Yeah, Army won by about 40 and Navy lost by 50.
So, yeah, that was interesting.
Anyway, asawins.com if you're interested in that deal that they have, or you can still call Mike and his team at 1-888-272-1098. Thanks, Mike. Mike Merlet of Market Sports Analyst. This is the Mark Belling Weekend Football Preview sponsored by Holiday Automotive. It's worth the drive. Mail-in voting is an issue that I think is going to end up being as big a story in the United States as rioting and COVID-19. I believe that what you're looking at is going to be a chaotic mess. And I don't know how anybody can possibly think that it's not going to be that way between fraud and the fact that the Postal Service can't deliver mail on time. Some thoughts on that issue. Yes, we have another segment that's still coming up, so some thoughts on that issue. But before I quickly get to that point, Paul, do you have a quick thought on the Packers? Will they be good, bad, somewhere in the middle? And Paul said they'll regress a little bit, but he still thinks, well, if they only regress 2 games, they probably win the division. I mean, 2 games is still 11-5. I mean, I do admit it's hard to recall they were 13-3, but part of it is they weren't a dominant 13-3. Rodgers won so many of those games, and the defense with the so-called Smith brothers, they made all those big plays at the end of games, and the Packers had all these nail biters last year. I look at the Packers and I see a team that really hasn't changed personnel much. All the draft choices, virtually all were on defense, but I do think the breakout player is, I just think Dillon, the running back, is. I don't play fantasy football, but that guy's going to score a zillion touchdowns because they're going to put him in the game every time they're on the 1 or the 2 yard line. And he's not a new John Kuhn. This guy actually has gears and he's fast and he's athletic. He's not just a bull like Kuhn sticking his head in there. This guy's a real running back, and they've got a change of pace running back situation now between Jones and him, and they still have, the one Williams from Notre Dame is gone, but the other Williams, I mix up their first names, but starts with a T, I believe. He's still there. So they have 3 really good running backs. Same as last year. I worry about the depth at receiver. All right, we'll talk about mail-in voting in the next segment. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Here's some sobering information on the Packers that Mike did not have time to pass along in the air, but he sent into us. In the last 30 years, there have been 52 teams to improve by 6 or more wins from one year to the next. Now, that's what the Packers did from 2018 to 19. Of those teams that showed the dramatic improvement, only 18 of the 52 improved their record to at least 12 wins. The Packers, remember, did that at 13. So only 18 in the last 30 years, only 18 teams improved by 6 wins to get to at least 12. Just doesn't happen much. Of those teams, 0 won the same number or more games the following year. There isn't a single case of a team that improved that much that improved again the following year. All lost at least 2 more games the following year. 13 of the 18 lost at least 4 more games the following year. So I think that all of that would make sense, especially in the case of the Packers. First of all, teams that go 13-3 generally don't. Again, there's usually only one way to go, but down from there. But the Packers could still regress 2 or 3 games and still be a contender to win their division. We'll see. Dan Henninger's column in today's Wall Street Journal focuses on something. You can see this coming from a mile away. There is going to be a train wreck in this country because of this mail-in voting thing, between the combination of fraud and, I think, tens of thousands of ballots that either legitimately or suspiciously show up after the fact with no control at all as to who they are and where they came from. Before I share with you Henninger's column, again, my strong advice to the audience is to vote in person. My strong advice is to not wait until Election Day. I believe that there is a real possibility of rioting in this country on Election Day in Republican areas to try to stop Republicans from voting. My encouragement is to vote in advance in the 2 weeks we have in Wisconsin, to vote in-person absentee voting. In other words, you can fill out your ballot, but you have to vote it in person in the 2 weeks prior to the election. Do not trust the mail. Who knows what could happen with those letters, not to mention the fact that many are going to be lost. Again, if you have no other option to vote but the mail, yes, mail it in. But I strongly encourage an in-person vote in the 2 weeks prior to the election, and that's what I personally will do. To Henninger's column, and I want people to ponder all of this. He writes, Niagara Falls is a wonder of the world in part because when staring at its vast churning expanse, what comes to mind is, I wouldn't want to be swept over those falls. Welcome to the 2020 presidential elections. Some 120 million voters are in the same boat, headed for a political crack-up on November 3rd. But hey, we don't arrive at the top of the falls for 2 months. Why worry? On Tuesday, this newspaper's opinion column carried a bracing editorial, Will the Courts Pick the Next President?, on the impending mail-in voting fiasco. Read it and weep. The gist of the situation is that some states, oblivious to the laws of postal delivery gravity, are allowing ballots to be put in the mail only days before November 3rd. They may or may not show up by Election Day, but so what? Postal Service experts have warned of the risks of mailing ballots within 7 days of November 3rd. But hardly anyone is listening to them. Amid the maelstrom of state voting procedures, lawsuits are being filed to challenge existing deadlines. A federal judge told Georgia that if a ballot is postmarked before Election Day, it has to be counted whenever it shows up. Let me interject. Did you hear what that stated? A federal judge is ruling in Georgia that if they postmark the ballot before Election Day, they have to count it whenever it comes in. That would mean in Georgia that we will not know the results of that state until at least a week after the election. What if the ballot comes in 2 weeks later? That is an insane ruling, but it is what a federal judge ruled in Georgia. Back to Henninger's column. In Pennsylvania, some officials want ballots counted even if a postmark is missing. State election officials are going to eyeball signatures on mailed ballots to see if they match what's on file. Close doesn't count, only in horseshoes and hand grenades. Again, when you mail in your ballot, remember you have to sign the ballot envelope from the outside. Imagine the arguments about whether or not the signature and the name printed on the outside of the envelope matches the voting record exactly. What if somebody's address is off by a number or two, etc.? Remember, your ballot isn't marked, but the ballot envelope is marked. Then they open the ballot, and presumably they don't look at how you voted before it gets put into the machine. Back to the column. Ohio's League of Democratic Women Voters is already challenging the verification process. A long 2 months remains to throw other legal monkey wrenches into what's left of the election system. But here's the really dynamic mail-in metric. Polling done, now listen to this. Polling done by the Wall Street Journal suggests 66% of Trump voters plan to vote in person, but nearly 75% of Biden voters say they'll mail it in. Figure what that statement just means. Most Trump voters are voting in person. Most Biden voters say they're going to vote by mail. He picks up, arguably, we are going to have parallel elections for the same office. Not even close to arguable is that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden will claim each won his election. Dueling inaugurations, anyone? Portland's permanent political street fighting could be coming to a neighborhood near you. The excuse for rolling the election helpless onto the rocks is, of course, the pandemic. It's worth noting how much of essential America is being subsumed beneath the pandemic's unchanging conventional wisdom. Schools, universities, urban economies, industries, and now a national election must stumble forward as if nothing we know about the virus's virulence or transmission has changed since March. At institution after institution, leadership has ceded decision-making responsibility to an amorphous power called the science. That statement requires an apology to the scientists who are working worldwide and have been conducting debate and discussion about the virus's threat today versus the need to resume normal human life. Are we really going to allow a national political crisis caused by a demonstrably flawed voting system to just, sort of happen? A half year on, the pandemic has short-circuited independence of helpful input from much of the nation's leadership on protecting the election. Several reasons may explain the national outbreak of nonfeasance. One is, quote, Trump. After marinating for 3 years in antipathy for Trump, many elites in business, academia, and the media are willing to let the system rip to get rid of him. In turn, he's happy to oblige the rancor. In the Cold War, this was called mutually assured destruction. More intriguing is how racial issues that emerged after May 25th have suppressed normal political instincts and comments. The idea of Black Lives Matter has become a kind of alternative reality in which racialism informs everything, starting with that long list of torn down monuments to such notorious racists as Ulysses S. Grant. Being sarcastic. The presidential election was going to be difficult enough without the new element of racially motivated mob rage and one major party locked up over its historic ties to the civil rights movement and the current movement's street protests and violence. The BLM goal is to conform opinion. The result is that people who normally would speak up no longer do about anything. Last month, Seattle's police chief, Carmen Best, a black woman, was forced to resign. This week, Rochester, New York police chief, LaRon Singletary, also black, resigned with a bitter statement. As a man of integrity, I will not sit idly by while outside entities attempt to destroy my character. Their careers, a testament to racial advancement, are collateral damage tossed away in a day without defense from anyone. The complexities of their jobs aren't discussable. Instead, liberals and many others in and out of politics hide behind the virtue of the moment, intimidated by social media and the social justice sentiments of millennials. Between the pandemic and protests, we have fallen into a culture of silence this year. Now it looks as if we will nonchalantly let the mail-in vote mess float a presidential election over the falls into a political crisis. Stock up on water wings. Dan Henninger saying that we're headed for a disaster with a mail-in election. I have been saying the same thing. I also predict that the violence that we have seen in many cities will be occurring on Election Day in Republican areas as liberals, knowing most of their people are voting by mail, will attempt to obstruct the in-person voting. You are also going to have overt attempts by courts to simply count ballots that they know were not legitimately cast. And again, this is happening in many states, including Wisconsin, very little opposition at all to this push to conduct an election that is clearly going to be ripped by fraud and is going to have tremendous controversies over which ballots were legitimately cast or not. Again, all using COVID-19 as the excuse, as cover. We had an in-person election in Wisconsin in April. Nobody got sick. There is no reason to think that you can't, with 2 weeks of in-person voting, have people turn in their ballots in person and vote properly, as opposed to this mess that's going to occur. I am of the opinion that we are going to be on January 1st of next year with both sides claiming that they have won the presidency. And as many have argued, we are facing the very real possibility that the courts are simply going to tell us who the president is, with the military force to step in and either force Trump out of office, as many now fear, or block the Democrats from taking control, depending on what happens. As I say, if there was any common sense here, all of this is preventable. But I think very few people seem to at all be concerned about what Henninger points out is the inevitability that an election conducted by mail is going to be an absolute mess. I would not trust anything important to go through the regular mail. There's a reason why when you have any kind of important document that has to be sent, it's sent through a trackable system, either FedEx or one of the mail systems like the Priority Mail and so on. The idea that we're just going to let ballots come in from who knows where, signed by envelopes signed by who knows what, voted by who knows if it's the actual person, just float in and then be counted a week and a half after the election is over, and then having some lefty judges decide what's going to be counted and what is not. The legitimacy of American democracy, I think, ends with this election. Neither side is going to believe they lost, and neither side that is on the losing end is going to believe that whomever the next president is came in legitimately. The president's holding a rally tonight in Freeland, Michigan. I'm only looking at the crowd on television. It looks huge. Let's end the program with this. There is some confusion about the status of Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. I am here to try to explain this, knowing that some people will probably not follow it. Giannis is signed with the Bucks through the end of next season. However, and this is the key point here in terms of people wondering if he's going to stay with the Bucks or not, the Bucks have the ability to offer him what's called a supermax extension during this current offseason. The NBA has a salary cap on the Supermax extension. It has to, I think it's 31% over the salary cap. And we don't know what the revenue figures for predictions next year are going to be, but the maximum number of years is 5 years, and it's thought to be about $250 million. In other words, it'd be about $50 million a year. It's up to Giannis to decide if he wants to take it. Now, an extension means that you would put that on the end of his current contract, so it'd be a total of 5 more years he signed for, and only the Bucks can make that offer. They call this, it's a kind of a cousin of the Larry Bird rule, where teams can overshoot the salary cap to re-sign their own players. So the Bucks have the ability to offer Giannis that contract now, and he can sign it either in the offseason or any time during next season. If he doesn't sign it, I think the Bucks have to seriously consider trading him. Because if he doesn't sign the extension, that tells me he's not going to sign when he becomes a full free agent at the end of the year anyway. Giannis has every reason to take the extension if he wants to lock in his money now. Means he wouldn't have to worry about getting injured, and the contract that he would get as a full free agent a year later probably wouldn't be that much more valuable. So if he isn't willing to take the extension now, it's probably a sign that he's not going to stick with the Bucks long term anyway. Giannis is not going to demand a trade now, but if he doesn't sign the extension, it would tell me that he probably isn't going to stay here anyhow. So the key will be whether or not he takes the extension once the Bucks offer it to him. It may well be that he will want to wait and see what happens during the next season to see whether or not the Bucks are a contender. He's got to be soured by what happened during the end of this season. For that reason, I expect that the Bucks will be making significant changes in this offseason in an attempt to demonstrate to Giannis that they are serious about winning a championship this coming season, and that would probably mean adding one major star to the puzzle. And I think if you took a look at how the Bucks season ended this year, they have one star, a couple of really good players in Bledsoe and Chris Middleton, but they are lacking that second additional cog. Just about every team that tries to win a championship has a superstar and a borderline superstar next to him. And Brook Lopez is just a player. He's not a star. And the Bucks needed a Jimmy Butler type. They need a Kawhi Leonard type. They need somebody that's almost at the level of Giannis in order to win that. And I think that's going to be the priority in the offseason, to see how many players you're going to have to get rid of, including some pretty big names, to put another star around Giannis.